The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1 Fortune Telling. In June, London's temperature gradually warmed. At Cheltenham College's primary school, located in the South Thames area, at 4 p.m., after a day of classes, students emerged from the school gates amidst bursts of laughter. Not far from the gate, beneath the shade of a tree, Miss Winnie, according to the divination, "You're unlikely to find the love you long for before graduation," Ino said apologetically, glancing at the numbers on the dice. Upon hearing this answer, disappointment crossed the young girl's youthful face. "No. Well, thank you for the divination, Mr. Swinburne. Perhaps this outcome was within her expectations." Her good upbringing had prevented her from futilely nagging. After paying the £1 fee, she turned and left. As the girl walked away, Ino, who had been apologetic just moments before, now displayed a maturity that belied her age. "Hey, boy." He deftly gathered the banknotes left by the girl, then bent down and carefully picked up the dice that had fallen to the ground. After doing all this, Ino continued to sit upright on his small stool, awaiting the arrival of his next client. Some say that the main themes of graduation season in June are generally farewells and sadness, but perhaps this only applies to the majority. After all, there are always one or two exceptions. It's finally over. As the bell rang for the last class, Hermione quickly gathered her belongings and left the classroom without a glance back. She showed no trace of nostalgia throughout the process. Compared to the melancholy of others, graduation felt more like a relief for her, allowing her to finally distance herself from those seemingly foolish classmates who were actually not very smart. Leaving the classroom, Hermione walked along the familiar path, her gaze fixed, as if nothing around her could distract her. This scene was unusual in the clamorous surroundings. Fortunately, it didn't last long. The moment Hermione stepped out of the school gate, she felt as if freed from restraints. Her gaze no longer stared straight ahead, but instinctively darted toward the shade of the trees opposite. Sure enough, seeing a familiar figure in a familiar place, a faint smile played across Hermione's lips. But from a distance, she saw the other person, smiling, chatting with a sturdy girl. The intimacy of their presence caused the smile that had just risen on Hermione's lips to vanish like snow under the rising sun. "You clearly love reading so much, yet you're scamming people everywhere." The scene made Hermione bite her lip in displeasure, feeling a certain resentment. The whole story began 2 years ago. Back then, a boy claiming to be a fortune teller would often appear at the end of the week in 4 or 5 surrounding primary schools, including Cheltenham College Primary. He would roam around the schools, always staying not far from the school gates, casting predictions with a dice, earning the students meager pocket money. Even though many praised the accuracy of divination, Hermione still believed it was just luck, or statistical probability, though she had never even tried it. However, she felt that the thought of using a single dice to predict the future was truly ignorant, and perhaps only a true fool would choose to believe it. It's just relying on good looks to deceive those infatuated girls. Despite this, Hermione didn't move. Instead, she stood there for a moment, observing the situation before leaving. Content. The afternoon sun filtered through the treetops. Ino sat upright on his small stool, dappled light casting a brilliant, crystalline glow on his face. His amber pupils, refracted by the light, seemed even more translucent. Simply gazing into those eyes could easily make one forget all worries. Their bright pupils always radiated innocence, a feeling like that of a newborn baby, pure and clean. His short, jet-black hair languidly spread out, reflecting the sunlight like obsidian. A long moment passed. Ino glanced at the gradually closing school gates in the distance. Sensing no further business would come, he rose and began packing his bags. It was merely an old, faded folding stool and a yellowed linen tablecloth. Ignoring the strange looks from those around him, he casually stuffed his few belongings into the canvas bag slung over his shoulder and sauntered off. With his steps, the string of simple shell wind chimes tied to the bag tinkled crisply. Half an hour later, Ino, carrying 2 bags of food, returned to his home, a natural bridge archway on the Thames. 3 months, counting the days. It's almost time for my next time traveling. Sitting under the bridge, Ino toyed with the dice and silently calculated the time. Seriously, he wasn't from this world. More accurately, he was a time traveler from the Far East, who had woken up to find himself, unbeknownst to him, a glorious foundling in England. But after enduring 10 years in the orphanage, he finally acquired his own golden finger. Ino vividly remembered that on his 10th birthday 2 years ago, he mysteriously entered another world. Since then, he's been able to visit that magical place periodically. It's called magical because it constantly unfolds legends, fairy tales, and folk tales. Ino sees his golden finger as more of a travel agency or a lifestyle experience center. After all, he always explores that diverse world from a purely casual perspective. There are no quests, no storylines, and no so-called system. And the timing of his entry is always uncertain. Sometimes it's a week or two, sometimes several months. The duration of his stay varies greatly, from the shortest 1 or 2 weeks to the longest, almost half a year. In short, it's all about chance. Even more bizarre is the way he enters this fantasy world. Honestly, that's what gives him the most headaches. I remember a particularly bizarre incident. It was on his way to the restroom, and the moment he opened the door, he found himself in a vast, untouched jungle. Of course, even if while this was completely random, Ino knew that relying on this miracle would at least ensure a comfortable future. Fairy tales, legends, and folk tales, while generally considered the most illogical and unreasonable, are undeniably powerful. After 2 years of wandering, countless attempts and explorations, Ino had mastered some simple rules and was now able to secure some advantages for himself in the fantasy world. Take, for example, the dice he often used for divination. Of course, it was precisely this ability to initiate fantastical journeys that compelled him to spend years in London's libraries, spending entire days there to recharge his batteries. It's worth noting that after his first fantastical journey, he carefully considered leaving the orphanage where he had lived for 10 years. After all, a single journey could last from several weeks to half a year. If he'd done that multiple times, it would have been difficult to avoid detection. Especially for a teenager, whose body is undergoing rapid growth, so much can change in just a few months or 6 months. If a thoughtful person were to notice him, a powerless orphan would have no other option but to be sliced and studied. However, fate always plays its tricks. The two worlds are like separate, never intersecting dimensions. No matter how long he spends in the fantasy world, his original world is but a fleeting moment. The most direct result is that he has spent years wandering and living in the fantasy world, while remaining an 11-year-old in reality. Despite this, Ino has no regrets about his choice. Compared to the constraints of the orphanage, he enjoys his current freedom. When he runs out of money, he sets up a fortune-telling stall at a nearby elementary school. In his spare time, he finds books to buy from bookstores, and his life is quite fulfilling. With the release of a new book, a new journey begins. Thank you to all readers, both old and new, for your support. Chapter 2 Letter from an Owl. London, along the Thames. The gentle waters flowed quietly, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves, adding a touch of tranquility and melodiousness to the summer afternoon. Fish and chips again. From the sparse bushes beneath the bridge piers not far from the river, intermittent complaints drifted through the sparse bushes. Ino expertly opened the paper bag. Though he complained about the scarcity and monotony of the food, his hands never faltered. He picked up a piece of golden, crispy fried fish and devoured it. Compared to traditional delicacies like beef Wellington and Cornish pasties, a filing fish meal for £1 was the most cost-effective option available. After finishing the last piece of fish in the bag, he took a long swig from his water bottle and finally leaned back against a bridge pier, feeling satisfied. Some people resist loneliness, while others relish it. But what is undeniable is that loneliness always represents strength and the ability to survive. It was like sheep and rabbits, without the ability to survive, they never dared experience loneliness. Beneath the bridge pier, Ino gazed at the smoke-belching factory in the distance, lost in thought. London in 1991. Perhaps the only major event I remember was that scarred little boy receiving his acceptance letter at Privet Drive. The inexplicable fragments that popped up in his mind made him laugh at himself. Ino sometimes wondered if the time traveler was truly the protagonist. His grades would definitely be subpar. Unlike the protagonists in novels who ventured into business at age 3 and traded futures at 5, it took him a full 10 years to finally integrate into this unfamiliar country. As for financial investment, shorting the ruble, and so on, it was out of the question. A very realistic reality, no matter where you live, A person's future and achievements are almost entirely determined from the moment they are born. Without the necessary background, even if they managed to make a profit, it would only become someone else's money. Ino was quite open-minded about this, knowing that those who had failed before would most likely fail again, even if they had a second chance. The most crucial factor in determining success is never so-called opportunity, but rather the source code already programmed before birth. Just like a Steinway piano, if it's not in your family when you're born, you'll likely never own one. There's really nothing wrong with mediocrity. Influenced by London's temperate maritime climate, living in the city is destined to avoid extreme summer heat. Even in the height of June, 93.2 degrees Fahrenheit is the maximum. Time flies, and a deep nap is in the air. Ino was suddenly awakened by a rustling noise. Having lived in London for 11 years, he had a clear idea of what was happening the moment he noticed something unusual. It was nothing more than some common birds like pigeons, doves, or ravens. He was conscious, but his eyes seemed glued shut, unwilling to open. He raised his arms lazily, waving them at the air. His long life as a wanderer had taught him that dealing with these timid creatures was a simple matter of waving his hand, and they would quickly depart. However, this time, his attempt unexpectedly failed. His brief attempt to repel them not only failed to produce the desired result, but actually intensified their aggression. Ino even felt his fingers being pecked. Such brazen behavior infuriated him, and without caring whether the other party understood him or not, he immediately stood up and shouted, "What's the matter? You're forcing me to have a snack." Ugh! As he opened his eyes and took in the scene, his angry barking abruptly ceased. It was like someone suddenly hitting the pause button on a movie playing on a phone. Everything was eerily quiet. Before Ino lay an innocent-looking gray and white Scops owl, or, to put it another way, an adorable English chubby-faced chicken. Of course, that wasn't the main point. The main point was the wax-sealed letter tied to its right leg. It was important to note that for a moment, he felt like someone was playing a prank on him. What a classic scene. But he also felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation, considering this was London. To verify the situation, Ino untied the letter from the owl's leg without a second thought and read carefully, "Dear Mr. Swinburne, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, with the term commencing on September 1st, 1991. Vice Headmaster, Minerva McGonagall." The familiar opening and title alone gave him the answer. England in 1991 was still 7 years away from the release of that explosively popular wizarding novel. At this time, Rowling might have just met the skinny, dark-haired boy who inspired her on a train in Manchester. Ino muttered, putting the envelope away. He had already pretty much rolled out a prank. It was a joke. Who would be so bored as to train an owl just to entertain a homeless orphan? Especially since the name and address in the letter matched. He gathered his scattered thoughts. But he was troubled by a thought. He didn't recall any magical riots in the past 10 years. Perhaps it had been sent by mistake? Ino quickly shook his head, dismissing his unreliable thought. Perhaps the Muggle school could have sent the wrong letter. But Hogwarts admissions, if the letter of admission and the pen of acceptance were wrong, it would cause chaos throughout the British wizarding world. Meanwhile, as Ino's thoughts drifted, he pondered the letter in a daze. The gray and white horned owl, with its black eyes, kept scanning its surroundings. Perhaps sensing the boy's poverty and financial constraints, it didn't approach him, as usual, to ask for snacks. A hint of human-like thought even crossed its chubby face. It looked as if it was considering catching a few mice to give to the boy as a snack. After all, a young wizard starving to death after receiving his Hogwarts admission letter was probably a rare sight. 10 minutes later, a simple reply, along with the adorable owl, vanished into the clouds. All my plans have been disrupted. Ino rubbed his brow in frustration. Honestly, the moment he saw the Hogwarts acceptance letter, he felt not only an overwhelming surge of excitement but also an indescribable joy, the fulfillment of a childhood dream. After a brief moment of excitement, Ino realized something. It was 1991, and starting school at this time meant his future campus life was destined to be filled with surprises. First year Two-Face, second year Basilisk, third year Dementors, every year was truly different. It would be great to be in the same year with Percy. At worst, George and Fred would be fine. Going to school with the Savior is a recipe for death? Ino complained, somewhat wearily. He'd been careful in the first few years, and had been able to get by relatively safely. But the 3 years after the Goblet of Fire, It wasn't something he could just sit back and relax. During the final battle, Death Eaters stormed Hogwarts, and being caught in the crossfire was a matter of minutes. At worst, I'll just drop out of 5th year. After much deliberation, Ino could only come up with a solution, a temporary solution to cope with the coming catastrophe. A new book launch, a new journey. Thank you to all new and old readers for your support. Chapter 3 Miss Rabbit. Hogwarts, the headmaster's office. I've sent Hagrid off to fetch the child. Dumbledore removed his half-moon glasses, pulled a silk handkerchief from his pocket, and carefully wiped the non-existent dust from his lenses. Looking at the silent Snape before him, Dumbledore probably guessed what he was thinking, but some things simply couldn't be resolved by wishful thinking. With this thought, his eyes strayed towards Snape, or more precisely, towards his arm, hidden beneath his robes. The dark mark. Dumbledore understood this magic better than anyone. This mark, which should have vanished after Tom's death, had strangely persisted for 11 years. Though it was now very faint, its presence was there, and that was an indisputable fact. Perhaps this also indirectly proved one thing: Tom had never died, or rather, never completely died. This year was Harry's year for school again, which meant that the boy who lived would finally enter everyone's sight. All the past events flash back before Dumbledore. Severus, when Harry starts school, I hope you'll pay more attention to him and help him grow up quickly. Meanwhile, Snape's brow softened slightly at the mention of Harry's name. However, that softening was fleeting. Soon, Snape's eyes grew empty and indifferent once more. Dumbledore saw it all. A century of experience taught him that nothing more needed to be said. After a brief silence, Snape, in a rare move, spoke up. I'm the head of Slytherin. Unless he's sorted into Slytherin, I'll only fulfill my duties as potions professor. Of course, that's enough. Dumbledore replied with a hearty laugh. Some things truly don't need to be explained completely. Mutual understanding is best. So, is this the only reason you've called me in? Snape's tone was as calm as ever. These are the names of the young wizards who need mentoring. There are quite a few new students this year, and Minerva has complained to me more than once about the lack of staff. As he spoke, Dumbledore opened a side drawer and pulled out a thick, bound stack of parchment. You need to complete this before term starts. Phileas and Pomona received a list yesterday. Huh? Snape scoffed as he took the list, but he took it anyway. He knew better than anyone the reason for the sudden influx of new students at Hogwarts. It was simply to foster a close friendship between their children and the Savior. It's just that those who had once fled have now returned, taking advantage of the situation. Foyle's Books, London. A long-established bookstore, its most significant feature is its vast collection, arguably the most extensive in London. Someone once calculated that if all the books in the store were arranged in order, they would stretch a staggering 48 kilometers. Located at 84119-125 Charing Cross Road, the vast space is known as the world's largest bookstore. The address itself gives you an idea of its vastness, with over 400 people working on a daily basis. On the second floor, in the folklore section, Ino was poring over a 1-inch thick copy of 1001 Nights. Over the past 2 years, he'd developed a habit of persistent reading. After all, in that fantastical world, fables, fairy tales, and folklore abound. Reading more, accumulating more knowledge, never hurts. Sometimes, even seemingly plausible insights can create true miracles. As for why he chose a bookstore over a library? No legitimate library would issue a library card to an orphan of unknown origin, not to mention the hefty deposit required to obtain one. After much deliberation, a free bookstore seemed like the best option for Ino. Especially in a massive bookstore like Foyle's, no one paid any attention to a teenager, let alone how long he spent in front of the bookshelves. In the end, the princess successfully revived, married the prince, and lived happily ever after. As the story concluded, Ino rubbed his aching neck. This was also one of the bookstore's biggest drawbacks: there were no comfortable tables or sofas. Therefore, standing for an hour or two while reading was commonplace. 1001 Nights? I gave up on books when I was 6. I didn't expect your hobby to be so unique, Mr. Liar. A crisp voice sounded behind him, making Ino frown. He didn't like being disturbed while reading. But the owner of the voice seemed to be of the same age. For the sake of his reputation and future income from divination, he couldn't ignore it. Ino suppressed his inner displeasure, turned around, and said politely, "I don't think so. The value of any book shouldn't be determined by the reader's age." And, midway through his words, Ino suddenly paused, carefully examining the girl before him. 2 years might seem like a long time, but it wasn't enough to make him forget the students he'd read with. As for the brown-haired girl before him, he could guarantee this was definitely their first meeting. If nothing else, the two large, white front teeth alone were unforgettable. Since he wasn't a client, there was no reason to be polite. Thinking of this, Ino changed the subject and said sarcastically, "Tisk, tisk, tisk. If I remember correctly, you've never asked me for divination once. Don't you think it's a bit hasty to draw conclusions without verification?" "This. Miss Rabbit. You." The girl seemed a little embarrassed and angry when she heard this, and a blush spread across her fair face. "You take so much pleasure in criticizing other people's appearance? That's not gentlemanly at all." However, before the other party could finish, Ino seized the opportunity and asked back, "Is it ladylike to casually give people nicknames?" "Huh?" Hermione was instantly frustrated by the rebuke. She took several deep breaths, trying to calm herself down. She was furious. This was the first time she had suffered such a big loss in an argument with her peers. But the other party's words were so logical that she couldn't refute them for the time being. "Okay, I apologize about the nickname." Hermione's mind raced. Facing a losing situation, there was no point in nagging. After a decisive apology, she continued, "Here's £1. I'd like you to tell me whether I'll go to Winchester College or Wickham Abbey." "Okay. Find a quiet place, and I'll tell you right now." Ino agreed without a second thought. Only a fool would refuse money offered right to her door. Going to Hogwarts, not to mention the daily expenses of school, would be a huge expense just buying storybooks. After all, there were no Muggle books in the Hogwarts library. A new book launch, a new journey. Thank you to all our readers, both new and old, for your support. Chapter 4, Occlumency. Half an hour later. In the leisure area on the 5th floor of Foyle's bookstore, the divination dice spun relentlessly on the table, like a clockwork top, with no sign of stopping. "This doesn't make sense," Ino muttered to himself. Though a little surprised, his expression remained unchanged as he pondered the cause of the problem. After a brief moment of reflection, he came up with another possibility. He calmly put the dice away and glanced at the girl beside him with displeasure. He had performed divinations at least 100 times in the past 2 years, and he knew the rules of the dice by heart. The 6-sided dice, with numbers 1 to 6, represented the probability of an event occurring. 0%, 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, and 100%. And now, the dice kept spinning, indicating a constant possibility, neither success nor failure. However, such an outcome would never occur in a divination. Just like there's never a 50-50 chance of success, everything has its upside. It could be 49.999%, but definitely not 50%. Back to the point. Ino's mind replayed their encounter, and then he recalled how she'd called him a liar. He quickly realized she wasn't telling the truth, likely using some false divination conditions to sabotage him. He'd encountered this before. After figuring it all out, he said angrily, "Rabbit. Excuse me, Miss Unknown. Are you sure you have the chance of getting into these 2 schools, and not another one like Smeltings? There's one thing you should know, a fool will never get into Cambridge or Oxford." For the sake of the money, Ino didn't call her Miss Rabbit this time, but he subtly mocked her for trying to sabotage him. "Miss Granger. My name is Hermione Granger. And I'm absolutely certain my grades are good enough for these 2 schools, not those second-rate schools you're talking about." Hermione caught the sarcasm and, like a cat with its fur standing on end, her entire demeanor was filled with aggression. Faced with a sly expression, Ino didn't even raise his eyelids. His mind was now captivated by the woman's name. After all, the name Hermione was incredibly recognizable. And thinking back to the owl letter, after a moment's hesitation, Ino asked, "So your father is also a dentist?" Hearing the word dentist, Hermione froze for a moment, then asked in surprise, "Did you divine this?" "It's correct, but I asked you to divine my future school." "Confirmed." Ino thought to himself. Sharing the same name, living in London, and sharing a dentist father. He was 100% certain the woman before him was Hermione Granger, the future Minister of Magic and one of the Savior trio. Ino made a decision instantly, to get away from this woman as quickly as possible, or at least keep some distance. Hermione's close proximity at Hogwarts undoubtedly meant she was indirectly holding Harry's hand, and perhaps Malfoy would be interested. Getting closer to the savior? Ino wasn't interested at all. Harry for the next 7 years, well, those who understand will understand. Miss Granger, the divination has concluded. Neither of these two schools is your future. After succinctly stating the results, Ino picked up the £1 note on the table and was about to leave. As if sensing the doubt in the girl's eyes, he reluctantly made another promise before leaving. Of course, if you do get into those two schools, I'll return your money double before school starts. Don't worry, I won't run away. With that, Ino walked out of the lounge without a glance back. With Miss Know-It-All around, he didn't plan to stay in the bookstore any longer. Instead, he planned to buy a few books to take back, as a precautionary measure for future school life. Meanwhile, Hermione, looking at the empty chair, lowered her head in a grievance. She wasn't happy at all. I came to you for my divination, and you spent so much time talking to them, why only a few minutes with me? Foyle's bookshop, first floor lobby. Under the bookstore cashier's astonished gaze, Ino paid a hefty £10 and successfully purchased 3 famous fairy tale anthologies, Alice in Wonderland, Hans Christian Andersen's Fairy Tales, and 1001 Nights. It was almost noon when he left the bookstore. Ino couldn't help but quicken his pace back home, for he had more important things waiting for him that afternoon. The letter he'd received by Owl had clearly stated that a Hogwarts professor would visit him that afternoon to help him complete the enrollment documents listed in his notice. This was something he couldn't miss. Returning home, Ian quietly read his newly purchased books while waiting for the appointed time. Time slipped by. When his old pocket watch struck the hour, Ino decisively closed his book and looked around. Sure enough, a figure suddenly appeared out of nowhere within his sight. Seeing who it was, Ino's heart skipped a beat. He immediately felt a surge of grief and indignation. Other newbies were guided by the responsible Professor McGonagall, but now he was the half-blood prince. In his long, flowing black robes, his greasy hair clinging to his face, he was none other than Severus Snape, the current head of Slytherin and potions professor. Just as Ino was stunned, Snape, expressionless, approached him. Although he had read the books and had some understanding of Snape, he still felt a certain discomfort in the face of those empty, lifeless eyes. Unbeknownst to Ino, the moment their eyes met, Snape's heart was stirred with emotion. Purity, cleanliness, brightness. Snape read so much in those amber eyes. It was as if he had opened a window across the river of time, revealing all the beauty of the world. Number 19 Spinner's End, a dilapidated house, little boys gathered around their mothers, clamoring to hear wizard stories. A thin, black-haired boy in a quiet park, a girl with a sweet smile and emerald eyes. Scenes flashed through Snape's mind one after another. Put away your poor Occlumency. Snape's voice was chilling, and even from his tone, it was clear he was suppressing something. I'm a professor at Hogwarts. I'm here simply because your name appeared on a list requiring guidance. It seems there's an error on that list, and someone doesn't need this guidance. No guidance. Ino, hearing this, didn't bother to think about Snape's Occlumency and quickly explained, Sir, I believe there's some misunderstanding between us. I've been wondering since I was 10, and without the school's help, I wouldn't be able to buy the things I need for school on my own. Ino spoke rapidly, but there was no other way. After all, the person before him was Snape, not Professor McGonagall, the responsible professor. Others might have been intimidating, but the half-blood prince was a man of his words. He meant what he said. He'd be completely lost if he stayed that way. Not to mention Diagon Alley's location, the cost of books and ones alone was a headache. Ino wasn't familiar with the exact costs of the wizarding world, but he could guess it wasn't the £10 or so he'd spent that morning buying a few books. After hearing the explanation, Snape didn't leave immediately. Instead, he took a moment to survey his surroundings. A wild bridge arch, tattered canvas, a second-hand stool. If he had to find a single, usable item, the nearly new aluminum kettle would probably be the only thing left. It was fortunate that it was midsummer. If winter had arrived, living here in these conditions, he'd likely freeze to death the next day. Pack your things and follow me. Snape believed Ino's explanation, or rather, his own judgment, but he was also a little surprised. This boy before me is a master of Occlumency. This was what puzzled him most, because this wasn't just some superficial way of concealing one's thoughts. Snape knew better than anyone that only those who mastered this magic could allow any prying eye to see exactly what they subconsciously desired. A new book launch, a new journey. Thank you to all readers, old and new, for your support. The new book has been signed, so feel free to collect it. Chapter 5: The Story of the Magic Wand and Mother Elderberry. Diagon Alley. The cobblestone streets were lined with a variety of quirky shops. Novels, movies, and television couldn't capture the scene here. The magic was myriad in forms and forms. But Ino ignored it, following Snape intently. Though curious about everything around him, he knew he wasn't following the responsible Professor McGonagall or the guileless Hagrid. Therefore, completing all tasks quickly was the most important thing to do. He knew the way, and with only 2 months until school started, he could definitely come back and enjoy a nice stroll. Leaving Gringotts, Ino held a small cloth bag containing 20 galleons. This was the entire amount of funding Hogwarts provided to incoming students. Of course, this funding wasn't free. He'd seen the details clearly when he'd signed the bill. Upon closer inspection, it was essentially an interest-free loan, to be repaid within 3 years of graduation. Even so, this measure had truly helped many people, a fact no one could deny. Ino, holding the grand, turned to Snape. "Professor, what do we do next?" "You, not us." Snape deadpanned, correcting Ino's grammar. Then, with a deadpan expression, he said, "Take your money and buy the items on the list. My responsibility is simply to lead you to Diagon Alley and ensure you receive the money as you wish." Ino. Looking at Snape, who didn't even turn around, Ino raised his arm and rubbed his sore cheek, maintaining a perpetually harmless smile that kept his facial muscles frozen. "What the hell? Did I dig up your ancestral home in Spinner's End?" He still had no idea how he had offended this guy. He might have black hair, but he didn't have emerald green eyes. Although he felt a little indignant, it was all he could do for now. As Snape had just said, he had fulfilled the professor's responsibilities, even if he wasn't entirely clear on the specifics. But he also knew that Snape wouldn't lie about something like this. In front of Gringotts, Ino's mind flashed back to their encounter. The phrase "poor Occlumency" made him think a lot. Just as Snape disdained lying, so too would he not say meaningless things. He mentioned Occlumency. In his thoughts, Ino immediately thought of his disguise. To survive safely in a fantasy world, pretending to be an innocent and kind child was essential. The fantasy world might be unreasonable, perhaps illogical, but it held fast to one principle, a principle that held true in all fairy tales and folk tales. That kind children always survived, even if they encountered difficulties along the way. Because of this, he had been diligently disguising himself, forcing himself to appear harmless. Perhaps this is just part of the story. Ino shook his head slightly. He still knew too little, and it took him a while to understand why. "Forget it. I'll look for the answer in the library after I start school." Unable to figure it out, he simply gave up thinking about it. After all, he had a lot to do right now. 15 minutes later, Ino walked out of the second-hand grocery store with a docile look on his face. Not only did he buy a discounted second-hand cauldron and glass bottle that looked good, he also found out where Ollivander's wand shop was located. Perhaps because of his deep anticipation for wands, he walked briskly. It wasn't long before he arrived at his destination, the only wand shop in Diagon Alley, and perhaps even in the entire British Isles, Ollivander's wand shop. The erosion of time had left the shop sign somewhat mottled, and even the gold lettering had faded a bit, but if he looked closely, he could still clearly read the inscription. Ollivander's, crafting fine wands since 382 BC. Ino stood outside, gazing at the name that had appeared countless times in books and films, feeling a surge of excitement. Where the story begins. Ino sighed inwardly, then pushed the door open and entered. Upon entering the shop, Ino discovered it wasn't as spacious as it appeared from the outside. The actual usable area was pitifully small. Crowded, cramped, and outdated became its defining characteristics. Despite the small size, the room's furnishings held a sense of mystery. Wands were displayed on faded purple mats, while even more were crammed into long boxes and stacked on old shelves that reached almost to the ceiling. Thousands of wands neatly stacked together created a tranquil and solemn atmosphere, a place seemingly forgotten by time. "Good afternoon." A new face. A gentle voice echoed from the side as Ino surveyed her surroundings. His features were aged, his silver-gray hair tangled and shoulder-length, but his eyes, piercing with a light, were unforgettable. "Good afternoon, Sir, Ino replied politely, then added, if possible, I need to buy a wand of my own. Of course. Every summer vacation, the young wizards who come here do so to find their own wands. Ino smiled and said nothing about Ollivander's surreptitious substitution of find for buy. Son, which arm do you usually use to wield your wand? Ollivander rolled up his sleeves and picked up a ruler from the corner. Right arm, sir. Ino offered his own arm to facilitate the measurement, though he had never understood the purpose of these steps. Seeing his partner's cooperation, Ollivander expertly unrolled the tape measure and began measuring, never forgetting to promote his philosophy of wands. Actually, many people think it's the wizard who chooses the wand, but quite the opposite, it's always the one that chooses the wizard. This time, Ino didn't choose to remain silent. Instead, he took the initiative and said, I agree with that. It's like the story of the elderberry mother. To some, they're just trees, but to others, they're kind spirits. Elderberry mother. Ollivander stopped what he was doing and looked at Ino with a puzzled look. It's a muggle fairy tale, sir. It's very vivid and has a moral. Seeing Ollivander's curious look, Ino didn't hold back and began to tell him a story from Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. 2 years of reading had given him a familiarity with stories and folklore. In that distant ancient time, the incident was simple, a mischievous little boy who broke his leg and refused to drink the bitter elderberry soup, thus embarking on a fantastical journey. The boy first saw the elderberry in his bowl grow into a towering tree, and then a green-skinned woman emerged from the tree. Instantly, the growing elderberry carried the boy skyward, so frightened that he clung to a branch to avoid falling. After an unknown amount of time, the elderberry stopped growing, and he was transported to a beautiful landscape filled with birdsong and fragrant flowers. The branch he had been holding transformed into a beautiful young girl, and the boy fell deeply in love with her. He loved this girl, whose fragrance emanated from the elderberry. He boldly confessed his love to her, and she accepted. She plucked an elderflower, placed it on the boy's head, and said, "Here is your eternal life." The story wasn't long. Ino finished it in less than a quarter of an hour. Mr. Ollivander remained silent, listening intently. However, the story's finale offered a dramatic twist. The two married, witnessed by various animals, and lived a peaceful and happy life, even having a bright and intelligent child. Until one day, when their child broke his leg again and needed elderberry treatment, the boy remembered everything, remembering his mother still waiting for him at home. Awakening from his dream, he returned to the same place, transformed into the injured boy. Seeing the still warm elderberry syrup before him, this time he didn't refuse, but drank the bitter draught in one gulp. With Ino's final word, this profound story came to a close. After a brief silence, Ollivander couldn't help but applaud, commenting with some excitement, "A truly fascinating story, yes. They are all alive, the elderberry, the rowanwood, the applewood, the grapevine. A new book launches, a new journey." Thank you to all our readers, both new and old, for your support. The new book has been signed, so feel free to collect it. Chapter 6 I Didn't Say I Won't Pay. Ollivander's Wand Shop. In the small room, a silver-haired old man seemed lost in some self-constructed world, mumbling to himself and mumbling incoherently. The scene was a bit eerie. Seeing the scene before him, Ino had no choice but to remind him, "Sir, if possible, I'd like to get my own wand as soon as possible." Glancing through the window, he saw that someone was already waiting outside the shop. Perhaps out of common courtesy, they didn't rush in. "Ah, sorry, kid." "That's good." Ollivander, obviously aware of the waiting customer, wasted no time and immediately began the measurement process that had been interrupted. First, he measured from shoulder to fingertips, then from wrist to elbow, shoulder to floor, and even took the time to measure the circumference of Ino's head. The enchanted measuring tape moved back and forth repeatedly. When everything was ready, Ollivander turned and stared into Ino's amber eyes for a long moment. Tentatively, he said, "Try this one." An elder phoenix feather, 12 inches long and reasonably flexible. It was the most active one when you were telling the story just now, so I think it would be a good match for you. A very beautiful wand, that was Ino's first impression. Unlike other common elder wands, the protruding joints on this one weren't as distinct. Instead, they were arranged in a staggered pattern, resembling white gemstones inlaid in the shaft from a distance. While he acknowledged the wand's beauty, he wasn't entirely convinced by Ollivander's description, strongly suspecting it was just a whim after listening to the story. After all, while this world possesses magic, it's limited to magic. The fantastical things found in fairy tales and folklore probably wouldn't hold much water here. Despite this, Ino carefully accepted the wand. Both phoenix feathers and elderberry are incredibly special in magic. It felt delicate and smooth to the touch, and even seemed to carry a subtle warmth. But that wasn't the point. He clearly saw, the moment he grasped the wand, the tip glowed with an emerald green glow, and then a six-petaled white elderflower blossomed. Unlike Harry's wand selection, with all the clatter and clatter, like an energetic child, the elder wand in his hand was like a shy girl, expressing its thoughts with subtlety and reserve. Excellent! Ollivander exclaimed excitedly. The sudden sound startled Ino, and by the time he recovered, the blossom on the wand had quietly dissipated. I knew you were a good match, honestly. It was, well, very happy when it was listening to the story just now. Ollivander, the instigator of this whole thing, continued to expound on his ideas, rambling like a chatterbox. Here we go again. Ino couldn't help but roll his eyes. He admitted that this one was indeed a good match for him. Holding it in his hand, it felt like a long-lost friend, a faint sense of familiarity. But if you were to talk about autonomous consciousness, personality, or intelligence, sorry. I really don't feel anything. Seeing that the other party was ready to talk non-stop, Ino had to use his ultimate move. Yet, you're right. Since it's so happy, does that mean I can take it for free? Ollivander, in the decades since he inherited the shop, this was the first time he had encountered such an argument, and Ollivander was stunned for a moment. Ahem. That's not the case. I mean, a match simply means the wand has found its rightful owner, not that it's free. As if afraid of hearing another outrageous excuse, Ollivander spoke without missing a beat before Ino could react, a truly special offer of 7 galleons. Remember, that's the initial price. Take good care of it. Okay. I didn't say I wouldn't pay. Seeing the other man's wary look, Ino wordlessly opened his wallet. Leaving the wand shop, he felt an inexplicable sense of contentment. Owning a real wand was something he had once never dared to dream of. Now that his dream had come true, a heartfelt happiness filled him. Happiness is that simple. Having lived 2 lives, he knew clearly that happiness doesn't come from a comfortable and prosperous life. The fundamental source of happiness lies in the constant presence of hope. Just like his 2 years of wandering, even with no fixed place to live and no food to eat, he always believed that he could leverage the opportunities of the fantasy world to live a more fulfilling life. Therefore, even the simple bridge underpasses and cheap food became decorative elements of his life. Meanwhile, after buying his wand, Ino strolled leisurely along the cobblestone streets, the unfamiliarity of arriving in Diagon Alley vanishing. After all, I own a wand. With this thought, he sauntered to his second stop, the legendary Flourish and Blots. As for second-hand books, he wouldn't even consider them. Learning magic wasn't like reading a fairy tale. Missing pages or scribbling on them wasn't a big deal. Learning, as it affected one's future, meant no sloppiness. Even after receiving the grant, he had a plan in mind. He could get cheap second-hand goods for anything, but wands and books were the only things he had to buy new. Actually, if you look closely, the 20 galleons Hogwarts gave wasn't a random sum. It was just enough to buy everything, except, of course, the owl. On the south side of Diagon Alley, a shop, quite unlike the wand shop, sat quietly on the street. The brand new sign and spacious frontage alone spoke volumes about its business. Flourish and Blots, consistently ranked among the top 5 books in the original novels in terms of both appearance rate and popularity, is captivated by a subtle yet profound atmosphere. The air is permeated with a pleasant aroma of oak, mingled with a subtle fragrance of ink, reminiscent of books. 2 meager magical ornamental plants sit on a shelf near the entrance, adding a touch of life to the stoic bookstore. The interior is somewhat dim, but the weather is clear, allowing the afternoon sun to filter through the old windows, bouncing across the rows of shelves. This scattered sunlight provides a perfect view of the books on the shelves. Welcome to Flourish and Blots. Do you need to buy Hogwarts textbooks? First year? Second year? We have packaged sets over there. Or perhaps you need to purchase individual books? Textbooks are all here, and other books are on the shelves in the back. The bookstore manager is a middle-aged man with a somewhat greasy, overweight appearance. His slightly sunken eyes betray his non-English heritage. As he introduced the books to Ino, he pointed to the 2 rows of bookshelves in front. Perhaps textbooks were hot sellers during the summer vacation, So they were placed in the most conspicuous place in the center of the bookstore. Yes, sir. I need the entire set of Hogwarts first-year textbooks. Ino followed the other party's finger and glanced at the bookshelf in the front. A history of magic, fantastic beasts and where to find them, the standard book of spells. Elementary, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 8,000 magical herbs and fungi, magic potions and spells, the dark arts, a guide to self-defense. Hundreds and thousands of brand new books were neatly stacked together, making it look particularly spectacular. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all new and old readers for your support. The new book has been signed, so feel free to collect it. Chapter 7: The Bloom of Magic. At dusk, the first rays of sunset appeared on the horizon as expected, heralding not the birth of night but the death of day. As light and darkness alternated, Ino walked alone in Diagon Alley. Perhaps because it was summer vacation, the streets were bustling despite the late afternoon. Passers-by of all shapes and sizes filled the streets, most dressed in robes and pointed hats. The occasional muggle suit and tie seemed effortlessly out of place. Along the street stood a variety of bizarre buildings and shops: Gringotts, Ella's Owl Shop, Flourish and Blots, Florin Public Ice Cream Parlor, and Partridge's Cauldron. Illuminated by the setting sun, everything seemed mysterious and magical. Once familiar shops now loomed before his eyes. Some things and landscapes truly require physical presence to truly appreciate their beauty. Ino stood still on the street, mesmerized by the scene before him. That summer, the dilapidated brick wall on screen split down the middle, similarly opening a path to fantasy for all the young wizards. Perhaps the seeds of magic were quietly planted then. Time to go back. Considering the time, Ino took one last look at the bustling streets and turned back the way he'd come. He knew that Diagon Alley was prosperous, even in peacetime. But a young wizard wandering alone at night was nothing less than a windfall for many. No matter how prosperous a place appears, there's always a dark side. And it seemed no coincidence that Diagon Alley was connected to Nocturne Alley. A light mist always rose in London at night. In a secluded bridge arch beside the Thames, Ino was busy preparing dinner. He first heated up the leftover fried fish from lunch on the stove, then poured a little black tea into his aluminum kettle. After his busy schedule, he rested comfortably against the bridge pier. 4 sickles and 5 nuts. I need to find a way to make some money. Ino looked at the pitiful coins before him and couldn't help but sigh. No matter where he was, money never seemed to last. Today's shopping had successfully spent the 20 galleons Hogwarts had given him. And that's it. Many things were second-hand, like the cauldron, the robes, the glass bottle, even the half-full bottle of ink. The ink, in particular, reminded him of the stationery shop owner's face when he heard he'd bought half a bottle of ink. Hilariously, his expression was even more horrified when he heard he could just add water to the ink and it would still work. You're so surprised? Adding water will only make the ink a little lighter, but at least it saves 5 nuts. Ino casually grabbed a few silver sickles and toyed with them, thinking about ways to make money. He dismissed fantasy first. Despite the abundance of treasure and gold, every fable, fairy tale, and country tale told the same story: greed never ends well. With good luck, you might find nothing. With bad luck, you might even lose your life. Fantasy values character, which was the very reason he had long striven to disguise himself. Kind and simple, you'll have smooth sailing, even animals will help you. On the other hand, evil and greedy, and a random stranger might just pop up and easily dispatch you. The only way left is divination. After much reflection, Ino realized that, besides storytelling, divination was his only other way to make money. The thought of divination always brought to mind the person who had given him the dice. Entering a fantasy world for the first time, utterly insecure, he blindly followed a seemingly kind-hearted bard. To gain the other's protection, he even served as a bard's apprentice for several months without compensation. Of course, the rewards were immense. Not only did he safely navigate the surrounding towns, but he also honed the skills essential to surviving in a fantasy world, acting kind and well-behaved. The two spent months together, and at their final parting, the other generously gifted him a precious gift, a 6-sided die blessed by the goddess of fate, suitable for divination. But Ino was more grateful for the other's guidance than the die itself. When living here, remember this: everything you desire actually controls you. When you want nothing, you possess the whole world. This wasn't just a warning, it had been Ino's guiding principle for the past 2 years. Remembering this mantra had helped him avoid countless potential dangers in the fantasy world. Teacher Hans, you've truly helped me." Thinking of the mysterious middle-aged man, Ino felt a heartfelt gratitude. The old aluminum kettle began to hum, and Ino's thoughts returned to the present. At the same time, the narrow bridge arch was suddenly filled with a delicate aroma of black tea. A few pieces of fried fish with bread and a pot of boiling black tea, a simple meal, formed the standard dinner for tonight. After dinner, Ino casually opened his bag from the day's shopping, rummaged through it, and pulled out a thick book. Beginner's Standard Spells, by Miranda Goshawk. He had chosen this book after careful consideration. Compared to fancy things like transfiguration and potions, he had always believed that spells were perhaps the most fundamental subject, the cornerstone, of magic. Other subjects, after all, were merely icing on the cake. And, more importantly, he wanted to quickly learn a few simple spells to prepare for his next upcoming time travel. As for the Statute of Secrecy and the Trace. In the original novel, Hermione tried every spell before school started and didn't receive any warning letters from the Ministry of Magic. Perhaps the trace only takes effect after the young wizard enters Hogwarts. Meanwhile, Ino opened the Beginner's Standard Spells and was surprised to find its content surprisingly friendly. There were only 7 spells in the entire first-year textbook. Aside from the levitation charm, which required some skill, the others, the unlocking charm, the softening charm, the fire charm, the restoring charm, were truly simple. Simply following the instructions would allow one to easily master them. Of course, it was only for the sake of mastery. After all, the restoring charm was taught from first year until graduation, taught every year and becoming increasingly difficult each year. In the bridge arch, a candle burned quietly, providing a faint light in the small space. By its dim flame, the young man read intently. 2 hours later, blazing, a spell rang out, and a tiny flame suddenly appeared at the tip of the Elder Wand, quickly dissipating in a breeze. Yet, even the tiny flicker of light filled him with excitement. This is magic. Ino gently stroked the jagged elder knots on the wand. For the next few days, through the thick canvas, he could see the flickering light of a fire in the obscured bridge arch. A new book launch, a new journey. Thank you to all readers, old and new, for your support. The new book has been signed, so feel free to collect it. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8 Entering the Fantasy World Again. London, South Kensington. Hermione was showing her new school uniform to her family, a plain black robe and a black pointed wizard's hat. Is this frog alive? Unlike the women's fascination with clothing, Mr. Granger was more interested in the hopping chocolate frog. He sat on the sofa, staring at it for nearly a quarter of an hour. Dad, it's just chocolate candy. Maybe it's magic that gives it temporary mobility, but it's always meant to be eaten. Hermione pursed her lips, looking expectantly at the only candy in the house, the chocolate frog. Mr. Granger seemed to notice his daughter's look and hesitated for a moment. Sorry, dear, you know how damaging sweets are to your teeth, especially since you're in the orthodontic stage. Once cavities form. Without waiting for Mr. Granger to finish, Hermione, as usual, took over the conversation and launched into a barrage of rants. Once cavities form, they're inevitable. Until the tooth is completely broken, the only treatment is a root canal, which kills the nerve, deep cleans the pulp, and then fills it with a new light-cured composite resin. Finally, Hermione said in a huff, I wasn't even thinking of eating it, I was just looking at it. She stopped looking at the chocolate frog. Perhaps she'd initially considered trying it, but the mention of orthodontic treatment had decisively abandoned the idea. Lately, whenever the topic of teeth came up, Hermione's mind kept coming up with Miss Rabbit, which irritated her and made her feel a little ashamed. Even if you have a modicum of divination skills, that's no reason to casually comment on a girl's appearance. Perhaps it was the owl letter that confirmed her previous divination results, or perhaps it was because she'd been to Diagon Alley and witnessed real magic. In any case, Hermione herself hadn't noticed, but her mindset had subtly shifted. She'd changed her way of addressing Ino from Mr. Liar to something skillful. No matter how long the night, dawn always arrives as promised. On the banks of the Thames, as the morning sun streamed through the narrow bridge, Ino had already woken. Another beautiful, sunny day. He stood up and pulled aside the worn linen curtains, After a comfortable stretch, he walked out of his own tunnel. Standing in the open space beside the bridge, he let the golden sunlight bathe his face. The warm feeling made him close his eyes, savoring the moment of relaxation and tranquility. After a quick wash, Ino sat on the grass, lost in thought, his gaze fixed on the Thames, shimmering in the morning light. Watching the boats plying past and the people strolling along the riverbank, he found himself increasingly drawn to the slow, leisurely pace of life. After a long moment of silence, Ino finally stood up, slowly walked back to the bridge, and began packing his belongings. Picking and choosing, he first stuffed some dried cheese and stale bread into his canvas bag, then a torn, dark gray blanket, and a longed-for copy of beginner's standard spells. All this was driven by a sudden, subtle premonition. After more than 3 months, today was almost the day he would enter the fantasy world again. Although he didn't know the exact time, he had a vague feeling, and this premonition had never failed him. Time passed by. Coincidentally, not long after Ino finished packing all his belongings, he suddenly noticed that the light around him had suddenly dimmed. In an instant, or perhaps even less. The warm, sunny morning had suddenly given way to the gloomy dusk of evening. The stark contrast nearly suffocated Ino. Before he could react, the chill air suddenly hit him. It's like this again, no time to prepare, still terrible weather. He fished a worn wool blanket from his backpack and draped it around himself, feeling a little better. However, from a distance, this attire made him look even more like a wizard on the road. The only thing missing was perhaps a pointed hat and a wand hidden within its lining. Autumn was withering, a long, dark and silent day, heavy clouds hanging low above the sky. A solitary figure suddenly appeared in the gloomy, alien countryside. In the remaining light of dusk, Ino could now take in the cold surroundings. The shabby scenery around him was filled with dilapidated houses, desolate walls, and withered, white trees. The sparse landscape exuded an indescribable gloom. Similarly, the surroundings were eerily quiet, the cold wind rustling through the treetops. Yet, all this was no longer surprising to him. Although he had once wondered why some wild places were always so dilapidated, the more he experienced it, the more he grew accustomed to it. After all, while this area looked a bit desolate, it wasn't dangerous at all, provided he refrained from greed and meddling. Half an hour later, before nightfall, Ino finally found shelter. The smoke rising from a nearby chimney and the faint smell of baking bread in the air gradually relaxed his tense body. In a fantasy world, the sight of a house or a bonfire in the wilderness wasn't enough to comfort one, as it could be the home of a demon or a witch. Only the rising wisp of smoke could truly bring a sense of security. After all, witches don't bake bread, they only brew disgusting potions. Meanwhile, Ino continued forward for a few dozen meters, following the direction of the smoke, and finally emerged from the eerie forest. What greeted him was an endless expanse of golden wheat fields, crisscrossing paths through the fields, and towering water wheels. A little further, he came upon a peaceful village, or rather, a small town. A dozen or so houses of various styles stood in rows, thatched, stone, and wooden, bakeries, mills, blacksmiths, tailors. Perhaps it was approaching night. The place seemed quiet, devoid of the daytime bustle. Entering the town, Ino's somewhat unusual attire attracted many glances. He didn't rashly approach the natives, nor did he receive any in return. It was as if they were engaged in a silent contest. 10 minutes later, another miniature town. As he assessed the scale of the place, Ino instantly filtered out stories set in larger towns and wildernesses. 2 years had allowed him to gradually grasp the essence of fantasy worlds. The king's capital city, a thriving commercial metropolis, medium-sized towns, small towns, villages, wilderness, each piece of the puzzle pieced together a vast, boundless world. Sometimes they have some connections, and sometimes they have nothing to do with each other. In short, every piece of the puzzle, every place, has a corresponding story. The difference is that the stories in some places have ended, while those in others have not yet begun. But no matter what, the people living in the puzzle still live their own lives. There are no taverns or hotels, so we can only find a place to stay. After a rough walk around the town, Ino had to admit that this place was like a closed paradise. All the facilities in the town seemed to be tailor-made for the people living here, and it seemed that outsiders had never been considered. New book release, new journey. Thank you all new and old readers for your support. The new book has been signed, so feel free to collect it. Chapter 9 Old John. The red shoes, the foolish knock, the girl treading on bread, the lazy spinner, the three lucky men. Stories flashed through his mind one by one. Then, Ino shook his head, clearing away the chaotic thoughts. He knew that what he had just seen wasn't enough to form a complete story. After all, there were countless stories that happened in a small town like this. His priority now was to find a temporary place to stay and a starting point for the town. Accommodation was easy enough. After 2 years of traveling, Ino had saved enough copper coins to stay in a small place like this for a while. But the starting point required careful consideration. First, he had to identify himself, as he had always done before, a bard's apprentice. Once he had that, the next step was choosing the people he would approach. He had to eliminate the mediocre. Just like the houses he had just seen on the road, the cookie cutter, the ordinary, the unremarkable were out of his reach. Instead, he preferred those with unusual designs or those that were simply run down. Moreover, even if the story of the town ends, there are still hidden benefits to be gained from these places. In the small town, old John, after a day of shoe repair, returned to his dilapidated house. Although it was drafty and occasionally leaked on rainy days, it was still one of the few properties he owned. "Hello, sir. Excuse me, but if it's possible, could I stay with you for a while? I'll pay." After careful consideration, Ino finally chose this dilapidated old house. The moment the owner returned, he hurried over to chat. The sudden voice made old John pause. After a moment's pause, he asked uncertainly, "Are you talking to me?" "Yes, sir. I'm a wandering bard. It's late, and there's no inn to be found in this town." His facial expressions and reasonable explanations, this routine Ino had mastered to perfection. Even facing Dumbledore, he was confident he could convince him, especially since he looked like an ordinary old man in his 50s. The bard. Old John's face etched with nostalgia, as if he were lost in thought. "All right, little one. If you don't mind this place being so rundown and leaky." "Thank you, kind sir," Ino replied sweetly. "Don't use sir or sir. I'm not a master, much less a noble. They all call me Old John, so you can call me that, too." "Okay, Old John. I hope you can call me Ino, too. The name Little One refers to me 3 years ago." Simple jokes often bring people closer, something Ino knew all too well. "Ha ha ha. Good. Strange bard I know," Old John replied with a hearty laugh. Night. In a small room less than 10 square meters, a faint kerosene lamp, so dim it threatened to go out at any moment, barely illuminated a tiny area. Beside the lamp, Ino and Old John sat facing each other. Being a bard is a wonderful profession. When I was young, I, too, yearned for freedom, always wanting to travel and explore the world. After wasting half my life away from home, I returned to find that the hometown I once despised no longer seemed to have room for me. In the dim firelight, the crisscrossing lines on Old John's face became increasingly prominent. "That's nothing. At least you've experienced it. Many people in this world return empty-handed, disillusioned, yet most never regret it," Ino replied casually. He sympathized with Old John's lament. In the other world, too many people leave their homes to study, work, and buy houses, only to discover in the end how difficult it is for a wanderer to establish roots and survive in a place that doesn't belong. "Now I believe you're a bard," Old John said suddenly, his tone serious. "Really? That's great." Ino shrugged nonchalantly. "I have plenty more stories. I can tell them to you later, but I'll definitely charge." "Ha ha ha, in this town, you're destined to leave empty-handed." Old John's casual remark instantly perked Ino up. What had he been so painstakingly searching for the access point map for? It was just cleverly gathering useful information. "What? Is it popular here to listen to stories for free?" Ino asked, feigning indifference. "That's not true," Old John waved his hand, continuing, "This place used to be very poor, and people often went hungry. Only in the past few years have their lives improved somewhat, but asking them to pay for stories is sheer fantasy." Ino's mind raced, and from Old John's words, he had already deduced a concerning clue. The story here must be over. This wasn't just a random guess, but the experience he'd accumulated over 2 years of travel. A place only undergoes significant transformation when its story concludes. Otherwise, building roads, starting businesses, and bringing prosperity to everyone, that's unthinkable in a fantasy world. "It doesn't matter. I won't stay here long. As long as I'm alive, the journey never stops," Whether it's the path under my feet or the path in my heart, it's all the same, Ino said with a sudden lack of interest. The end of the story marked the beginning of a dull life. And this, in turn, meant he was destined to gain nothing useful. Perhaps sensing the change in Ino's tone, old John offered a soothing reassurance. Little one. You don't have to be like this. Although people are accustomed to saving, at least they'll give away some of their spare belongings as payment for listening to your story. I told you, don't call me little one. Ino said, feigning anger. Haha. Okay. But you don't look very old. Perhaps it was their first meeting, or perhaps chatting by oil lamp was simply too extravagant. Before long, old John, citing exhaustion, ended their conversation. Late at night. Ino lay on his straw-covered bed, a chilly wind howled outside. Yet, as if possessing a mind, the wind cleverly circumvented the intact walls, flowing in through hidden holes. This made the already sparsely warm room suddenly chill even further. Faced with such conditions, Ino could only pull the blanket tighter around him. It must be said that this blanket, plucked from a dumpster in a wealthy neighborhood, might look tattered, but the cashmere was genuine, effectively insulating against heat loss. I'll find time to do a divination tomorrow. But it's good that the story is over, as I can use this time to enjoy some reading. Since the truth had already happened, he had to accept it calmly. Ino always kept one thing in mind: living in this world requires avoiding greed. Therefore, he never obsessed over gaining any benefits from the stories. After all, we only have one life, and as long as we're alive, there will always be opportunities. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 10, Death. The next morning, Ino reluctantly opened his eyes to the sound of clanging bells. After a quick look, he finally found the source. Old John was sitting alone outside, banging away at something. The rhythmic clatter had come from his hands. Are you awake? Then get up. Don't be like those lazy drunks who sleep until noon, old John called out from outside. Ino noticed that he seemed to have an inexplicable aversion to laziness, even a hint of resentment in his voice. Although he felt a little puzzled, he acted without hesitation. He jumped out of bed, grabbed a towel and toothbrush from his bag, and began to wash up. Old John, is anyone repairing shoes this early in the morning? Ino crouched nearby, observing old John's busy work with some curiosity. From the moment he saw the tools on the ground, he knew old John was a shoemaker. Life's getting better, so few people choose shoe repair these days, old John said without looking up. After a while, old John finally finished his work and sighed. Even though no one repairs shoes anymore, it's always good to hammer in a few more nails. Who knows if they'll be needed in the future? At least no one will be walking barefoot in the middle of winter. Hearing this, Ino nodded in empathy and sighed. Too many people turn a blind eye to the suffering happening around them. The irony is, they fantasize about being heroes and saving those far away. This wasn't pandering, he had witnessed too much suffering along the way over the past 2 years. As I said before, when a place's story ends, everything returns to normalcy. And suffering often strikes in these places, because the ordinary never creates miracles. After hearing Ino sigh, old John remained silent, a rare occurrence. After a long pause, he raised his head again, his gaze blazing upwards. I know, you're right. Those who fantasize about being a hero, only to find they can't even save those around them, are a huge joke. At that moment, old John, uncharacteristically, addressed Ino by name instead of little guy. This time, Ino didn't say anything else. He already had a suspicion that this town's story might have happened to old John. Even if he wasn't the protagonist, he certainly had a significant connection to it. But when he saw old John's melancholy, he knew now wasn't the right time to dwell on it. Ahem, old John. My teacher once told me something, and I'm passing it on to you. Clearing his throat, and waiting for old John to regain his composure, he slowly spoke. He said, life is like a small ripple, slowly spreading. Therefore, the normal state of life is probably still a regret. After a brief pause, Ino continued, old John, what I'm trying to say is that all life has light, like a burning match, faint, warm, and brilliant. And before the match goes out, if it can illuminate others, even for a moment, then it shouldn't be called a regret. Time seemed to stop at this moment, a long time passing, then a moment. I'm being lectured by you, little brat, really? Old John said half-jokingly. Although being called a little brat again, Ino didn't seem annoyed at all. He could clearly sense the sadness fading from him. A few minutes later, old John gathered his tools. Okay, I'm going to work. With any luck, we'll have a nice dinner tonight. If you're bored, you can go to the hills behind town. It's safe, and lots of kids go there picking mushrooms in the spring. Okay, I got it. Ino nodded, rising and heading to his room to get his backpack. If he'd just gotten this useful information, he'd have been delighted for a long time. But now, the show's over, why would you still keep an expired ticket? On the hills behind town. Blazing. Alaho. Restored. Ino carefully chose a secluded spot, making sure he wouldn't be easily discovered, and then began practicing magic with the help of the standard beginner's spellbook. As mentioned before, first-year wizards at Hogwarts only need to master 7 spells. However, in his opinion, these 7 spells were more like the prefixes to many advanced spells. They were like the 26 letters of the alphabet. Once mastered, they could be combined into words and elegant poems. A simple example, the first-year charm's final exam in the original novel involves a pineapple dancing across a desk. This involved the combined application of a softening charm, a levitation charm, and a locking charm. Similarly, Ino thought of Dumbledore's impressive Vulcan's Path, perhaps a sophisticated application of the fire charm. After all, a faint flame or a raging blaze is essentially the conjuration of fire. Ever since receiving the owl, he'd been contemplating his future. But no matter what, learning should never be taken lightly. If I can't roll you to death, I'll roll you to death. With a sigh, Ino rubbed his aching wrist, then raised his wand to begin another round of practice. Considering the future plot and for his own safety, he would now practice his magic quietly, hidden away while his peers played Quidditch and engaged in pranks. Time flew by, and hours flew by. Extreme concentration can lead one to unconsciously enter a state close to flow, where time passes completely unnoticed. That is, until the light dimmed noticeably. Hey, I never thought I'd experience this kind of unending sleep and forgetfulness someday. Ino, his concentration shifting, was overwhelmed by a strong hunger. It felt like he wanted to pounce on everything he saw, just to savor it. Without further ado, he quickly pulled the cheese he'd brought from his bag and shoved it into his mouth. After devouring 2 large chunks of cheese, his hunger was temporarily quenched. After a slight sigh of relief, Ino was stunned by the scene before him. The sky was ablaze with sunset glow, dazzling and eye-catching. The setting sun's afterglow against the clouds on the horizon made the entire sky appear as if smeared with red paint, a breathtaking beauty. In the small town below, where the houses stood in a row, wisps of smoke rose from the kitchens. The white smoke drifted slowly into the sky, looking at first as if the clouds were slowly pouring down upon the earth. Sitting halfway up the mountain, Ino felt like he was appreciating a truly extraordinary painting. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 11. 1 month later. Next to the town's central square. Later, Ali Baba told his son the secret of opening the stone door, and his son told his grandson, and all his descendants lived a prosperous life. Ali Baba's descendants cherished their good fortune and never indulged in extravagance. Therefore, they prospered from generation to generation, and their stories were passed down through generations. Ino sat on his small stool, vividly recounting a story from 1001 Nights. He was surrounded by a large group of children, including some elderly people and adults who had some free time. Amazing, Ino. One more. Yes, one more. I haven't heard enough today. As the story ended, before Ino could even begin, the children around him were already impatiently clamoring for a new one. As the person involved, Ino calmly faced the barrage of requests. Despite the noise and chaos, he remained silent, a typical example of the unprecedented approach. His expression had the children scratching their heads. They knew what Ino was waiting for, but they were powerless to do anything. The situation remained stagnant for several minutes, until a basket of freshly baked whole wheat bread was placed on the ground. Little Ino, tell another story. I think this bread should be enough to pay for the next one. The speaker was an elderly woman with raying silver hair, a plump and round figure, and a long linen dress so washed that it was pale, which always made her look a bit ridiculous. Ino glanced at the basket on the ground and instantly made a judgment. He immediately put on a warm face and said with a smile, "Look at what you said, Aunt Aisha. This basket of bread is worth at least 3 stories. Equal exchange, even if it was just a few pieces of baked bread." He was unwilling to take advantage, thus unknowingly nourishing his greed. Moreover, valuing audiences who can actually afford to pay is the principle of all minstrels. After all, they depend on people for their livelihood. Ino would never deceive or cheat Aunt Aisha. After all, there were very few people in the whole town who were willing and able to pay for his stories. During the pause, he quickly picked up the basket from the ground, opened it, and placed the loaves of bread one by one into his own bag, then politely handed the empty basket to the other person. "Since you've been paid, get started, little one," Aunt Aisha urged, taking the basket. "Ahem. Next, I'm going to tell you a story about a tailor, an elf, treasure, and a princess." Ino cleared his throat, waited for everyone to fall silent, then slowly began. "This is a story that happened in a faraway land, long, long ago. In contrast to the bustling central square, on the other side of the town, a somewhat deserted old street. Beneath a simple shack, a tattered canvas spread out on the ground, covered with all kinds of leather, velvet, and nails. Surprisingly, even though no one was there, its owner still squatted there, hammering away at something. The clinking sound was incessant and could be heard from far away. This was where old John worked every day, the only remaining shoe repair stall in town. A discerning eye would notice that, unlike before, when he'd sit at his stall and vacate his business, old John had been toiling away alone these days. This went on for almost a month. Rain or shine, no matter who was around, every day he was either hammering nails or whittling wooden shoe soles. Day after day, he repeated the same tasks that no one cared about. Horizontal ellipsis. Time slipped by unnoticed. In the center of town, after Ino finished his last story, the crowd around him gradually dispersed. It wasn't because they'd heard enough, but rather because life didn't allow them to waste a whole day on entertainment. Even the young children had to get home before dinner to help their parents, who had been toiling all day, with the firewood. When the crowd had mostly left, Ino stood up and stretched. He gathered his bag and picked up his folded stool, concluding another day's work. "A month has already passed without me realizing it." He looked down at the 31 pencil marks on the old canvas bag and couldn't help but sigh at the fleeting nature of time. Unnoticed, he had already spent a full month in this ordinary town, and the rewards were immense. Mornings were spent practicing magic in the hills behind town, and afternoons were spent telling stories at the fountain in the square to earn supplies. Every day was incredibly fulfilling. Ino could now perform the 7 standard first-year spells, including the slightly more challenging levitation charm. As his magical prowess improved, his storytelling repertoire shrank dramatically. Come to think of it, telling 3 or 5 stories in an afternoon simply wasn't enough. At this rate, even a large storehouse of stories wouldn't be enough to sustain a month of intense effort. For example, today, while he was clearly telling Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, the original story was so short that he had to embellish it with extraneous details, like scorpions, poisonous insects, and human pupae from the maze cave. He had managed to turn a few hundred-word story into a desert-style ghost blows out the light, stretching on for dozens of minutes longer. He finally concluded, to the indignant gazes of the crowd. Compared to these daily routines, what puzzled him most was that, so far, he felt no sign of returning. As the sun set, Ino walked alone down the street, his shadow stretched thin and long. As he walked, he occasionally nodded and smiled at the townspeople, making everything seem warm and inviting. Truthfully, nothing was more convincing than time, for it could silently change everything without notifying anyone. Time had allowed the town to unknowingly accept him, but he hadn't truly become part of it. It was as if loneliness was never found in the mountains, but in the streets, not in one person, but among many others. "It's no use staying here for so long in a place where the story ends," Ino muttered to himself. Normally, in a town like this where the story ends, he'd spend at most a week or 2 before returning to his original world. But now, a full month had passed, and there was still no sign of him returning, which made him feel a little bored. "Well, let's take it one step at a time," he sighed softly. Although he was filled with doubts, he felt helpless. 10 minutes later, Ino returned to old John's old house and found him crouched under the simple stove, fiddling with wood with a pair of broken flints, clearly trying to start a fire and cook. "Old John, stop fussing. We have fresh bread today." Hearing the call, old John dropped his flints, stood up decisively, and walked towards the dining table. "I can smell the tempting wheat aroma from far away, but I'm not sure you'd invite an old man like me to taste it." Faced with a teasing, Ino retorted mercilessly, "Come on. You talk as if there's something you're not going to give me, and you always eat the most." After a month together, he and old John had already become friends, constantly exchanging harmless banter. A bowl of mushroom soup with wild vegetables, 2 boiled eggs, and a basket of whole wheat bread. Just the size of this dinner alone would put it at a middle-class level in the entire town. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add it to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 12. Old John's Story. Dinner was over. Ino filled the lamp with enough kerosene to illuminate the entire room. Speaking of kerosene, it was undeniable that the townspeople were truly fascinating. Besides listening to stories for free, they offered a variety of other things for entrance, including this small can of kerosene. Afterward, Ino sat back in his chair and asked, making small talk, "Old John, why do you always use flint to light a fire? I'm not against saving money, but we can still afford 2 packs of matches for a copper." As he spoke, he pulled out the matches he had bought that afternoon from the package. It was a whole box, and judging by the appearance alone, it was a conservative estimate that it would last a long time. Honestly, after spending so much time with him, he had truly felt a pity for this lonely old man. It might not seem like much now, but what would happen if the situation were extended over many years? With no children, no savings, and even no ability to work, what would old John do? But his abilities were limited, and he couldn't do much about many things. All he could do was small things like buy some matches, trying to make the old man's final years easier. As Ino placed the matches on the table, old John froze in his tracks, his eyes filled with a strange sadness. Sensing that something was amiss with old John, Ino wisely chose silence. He truly couldn't help him right now. Besides, no one knew what was causing old John's grief. If he spoke too much and carelessly angered him, that would be disastrous. Silence reigned in the dilapidated cottage. For a long moment, the sadness in old John's eyes faded, replaced by a gleam of determination. "Thank you for your gift, little Ino. I'll take the matches." His voice, unlike his usual cheerfulness, was now a little hoarse. Upon hearing this, Ino didn't speak immediately. After a month, the long-awaited feeling of returning home finally dawned. "It seems the fundamental reason for my delay in leaving is old John." He immediately grasped the answer, and at the same time, he recalled a rare phenomenon, the story within the story. Generally speaking, most places, after a story ends, tend to return to normalcy. However, there are some special places that, after the story ends, continue to spawn new stories. Although such places are rare, they do exist. Let's get back to the point. After coming to his senses, Ino said with a relaxed expression, "As long as you like it, consider it our parting gift. You know I can't afford to give you anything more valuable." Parting. Old John paused, but quickly understood the reason. He murmured, "Indeed, a bard is destined not to stay in one place for long. Leaving is inevitable, sooner or later. I should have known that." "Haha, you're right. We won't stay in one place for long. Every bard is the wind, and the wind is a transparent river, flowing endlessly, following the changes in the terrain." Ino smiled in response. "But the river's destination is the vast ocean." Old John put on the expression of a seasoned man and advised, "Listen to me, little one. If you meet the right place and the right person, stay there. Life is always full of passion, but it will eventually return to peace. You can't wander all your life." After hearing old John's advice, Ino didn't immediately reject it. After pondering for a few seconds, he spoke again, "Perhaps you are right. The river's destination is the ocean. But the ocean will rise up rain, which is like cold meteors, riding on soft clouds and once again pouring down on the world. Hey, I'm debating with a bard." Old John shook his head with a hint of amusement, as if to stop the topic, and said nothing more. But Ino didn't want to end it there. Before leaving, he wanted to enlighten the elderly man. After all, the sadness that flashed in his eyes just now could not be hidden. "Old John, do you know what I love most?" Without waiting for a response, he spoke up. "I love the sun, because it's both rising and setting at every moment. When it dies down the mountain, collecting the desolate afterglow, It's the moment its other side burns back up the mountaintop, spreading its warm morning glow. So, old John, everything has two sides. Don't let your old ways of thinking hold you back forever. After saying that, Ino fell silent. Many things are most profound when they're just touched upon. After all, more talk is pointless. Similarly, he had made up his mind to pack his bags early tomorrow morning. About 5 or 6 minutes passed. Just when Ino thought they were done with tonight's conversation, a soft sigh echoed through the room. Looking up, he saw old John sitting across the table, as if he'd been relieved of years of burdens. While his appearance remained unchanged, he looked much younger. Even his silver hair, at first glance, looked less pale. At this moment, old John suddenly asked, "I've been listening to your stories these days, but I'm wondering if you'd be interested in hearing one from me now." Ino didn't say anything, but his actions made his intention clear. He pulled up his ear with one hand, pretending to listen intently. "Ha ha ha, you kid." Old John, amused by his comical expression, laughed out loud. After a moment's pause, he continued, "This story isn't set in a distant land, it happens right here, in this small town. Once upon a time, there was a young man who always yearned for the free world outside. Whenever a bard passed through town, he would tirelessly ask them about what was happening outside. As time passed, the young man finally succumbed to reality and married a wife. Though not beautiful, she was very virtuous, and this gradually brought peace to his restless heart." At this moment, old John's face was filled with a touch of happy nostalgia. But fate's twists are always unexpected. His wife, pregnant, unexpectedly passed away on the day of the birth. A daughter, but a wife? Such a blow stirred his once peaceful heart. He longed to escape, to a distant land. A few years later, he entrusted his 5-year-old daughter to his younger brother and left the small town where he had lived. As he spoke, old John began to cough with agitation, his breathing becoming short, his eyes filled with regret and annoyance. After a long pause, he spoke haltingly, continuing, "What the young man could not have imagined was that his brother, always hard-working and dutiful, had become addicted to alcohol after the death of his elderly mother. He became slovenly, lazy, and idle. To earn money for alcohol, he sent his young niece to sell matches barefoot in the cold winter to supplement the family income." At this point in the story, Ino noticed a flicker of tears in old John's eyes. Similarly, a sudden realization struck him, and his mind instantly recalled the famous, universally known story of the little match girl. As the story continued, he was now certain that old John was the irresponsible father in the story, the young man who abandoned his daughter and ran away for over 20 years before returning home. Old John's story had finally come to an end. Silence fell over the room, with only the occasional popping and faint crackling of the burning oil lamp. A long time passed. Only then did Ino slowly speak. "Old John, I have a story about matches too. Would you like to hear it? A new book launch, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass." Chapter 13 Old John's Gift. The moon was bright, the stars sparse, and tonight the moonlight in the small town seemed especially radiant. Its silvery rays streamed down the quiet streets, silently blanketing the earth in a blanket of white. From old John's old house on the corner, a rhythmic voice emanated from the room. Upon closer inspection, it was the familiar melody of a bard telling a story. Inside, Ino was vividly recounting a tale, the story of the little match girl. In the long, cold night, the little girl struck the first match. It shed a warm, bright light, like a small candle, delightful. The little girl felt as if she were sitting beside a large iron stove with polished copper corners and decorations. All the matches were lit. The light illuminated the little girl's surroundings, and in it, the little girl saw her beloved grandmother, the kind old woman who had passed away. "Grandma, please take me away. When the fire goes out, everything will disappear," the little girl pleaded, running to her grandmother. And this time, the grandmother in the light didn't disappear. Instead, she embraced the little girl tightly. The two of them walked across a bridge of light and arrived in a garden where there would never be hunger, never cold, and always freedom from worry. After more than 10 minutes, Ian finished telling the whole story of the little match girl. Contrary to his expectations, old John didn't cry, nor did he choke up. Instead, he felt relieved and a faint sense of relief. "Little Ino, you know what? When we first met a month ago, you said, All life is filled with light, like a burning match, faint, warm, and brilliant. And if, before it burns out, it can illuminate others, then it shouldn't be called a regret. Old John repeated his words, enunciating each word with a powerful force. Do you know how much comfort and confidence that statement gave me? My daughter's life is brilliant. She used her life to illuminate others, illuminating the man she tentatively called uncle. After the tragedy, he also gave up his alcoholism and moved to another city to start a new life. Hearing this, Ino decisively took over, saying, both the Redeemer and the redeemed have been given a new life. The difference is that the Redeemer's life is truly brilliant, not a regret. You're right. Old John said resolutely. So, I, too, must atone for my mistakes, use the remaining life to illuminate others, and become a true Redeemer. Is that why you've been hammering nails and making souls all this time? Ino asked. After all, he wasn't blind, and anyone could notice the change in Old John during this time. I'm a shoemaker, not much else. But when I returned, I learned that my daughter died barefoot, even wearing an apron her grandmother had left behind. Though determined, Old John couldn't conceal the sadness he felt when he spoke of his heartbreak. So I decided to use my limited skills to help as many barefoot people as possible get shoes. Even if I only help one person in the end, I'll be satisfied. No matter how long the night, the sun will eventually break. The next morning, Ino opened his eyes with a hint of fatigue. Last night, he chatted with Old John until midnight, and now he was up early, feeling a bit tired. While waking up early wasn't always necessary, the thought of possibly returning today quickly dispelled any remaining sleepiness. It's time to go home again. I feel like I didn't gain anything from this trip, but I've honed my speaking skills, Ino thought as he packed and washed, reflecting on the journey's accomplishments. If you don't count them, you won't know. What a load. 3 baskets of toast, several large bags of mushrooms, 2 small bottles of kerosene, dried wild vegetables, scraps of cloth. It all added up to a massive pile. And the gold, silver, or even copper coins he truly desired, he didn't have a single one. Looking at the troubling pile of odds and ends in the corner, Ino didn't want to take any of them. Deciding to leave them all to Old John, he left them all. After breakfast, Old John, in a rare move, didn't return to his stall to work. Instead, he looked at Ino's packed bag. Are you leaving today? Yes. I'm leaving today, Ino replied casually, gesturing to the supplies nearby and admonishing, I'm leaving those things for you. Don't refuse. They'd be a burden to me. Bandits love to intercept travelers with heavy baggage. Old John instinctively wanted to refuse, but after hearing the reasoning behind, he nodded silently, a gesture of acknowledgement. In that case, I'll give you a return gift, or people will say Old John is taking advantage of the little guy. Glancing at the pile of supplies, Old John stood up and walked to the cabinet in the corner. It was an old item so old that it had to lean on a few stones to barely maintain its balance. Old John fumbled around in the wooden cabinet. Soon, Ino saw the return gift that Old John mentioned. A small linen bag, jingling, and just by listening to the sound, you could tell that it contained at least silver coins, because copper coins could not make such a crisp and pleasant sound. Next to the small bag, there was a box of very old matches, and it looked like it had been used. There were even some burn marks on the edge of the matchbox. But Ino did not show any disgust. Instead, he carefully took the matches from Old John. Thank you for your return gift. I like it very much. As for this. Glancing at the purse on the table, Ino decisively shook his head and declined. No one is richer than a bard. Although we keep our gold in our heads, it's safer that way, isn't it? His refusal was resolute, but it also hurt. Who would be so foolish as to give up the gold they had earned if they could? But that's how it is in this world. Unless under specific circumstances, any act of greed will lead to unpredictable consequences. Without giving Old John a chance to speak, Ino raised the matches in his hand and explained, I already have the most precious gift. I can't greedily ask for more. He meant it sincerely, without a trace of falsehood. In this fantasy world, many things can't be measured by appearance alone, just like that humble divination dice. Moreover, this box of matches is a key item that connects 2 stories. Its specialness is obvious. At the same time, after handing over the matches, Old John carefully studied Ino's eyes. Yet, he saw no trace of disdain in those amber eyes, only sincerity and joy. It was clear the other person greatly appreciated the gift. Honestly, I didn't intend to give it to you at first. My gift to you was just this bag of gold coins." Old John reached out his calloused hands and clumsily untied the ropes binding the purse. The unique color of the gold coins captivated him. However, neither Old John nor Ino even glanced at the coins. Ino, in particular, had seen far greater treasures than this one. A mere bag of gold coins wasn't enough to impress him. But the appearance of this bag of gold coins resolved his earlier doubts. It was that Old John, despite having no financial skills, had been able to live a stable life for decades after returning to his small town. Now, he had finally uncovered the root cause. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 14, Departure and Return. After confirming that Ino truly had no interest in the gold coins, Old John tied the purse back with a string. "Thanks for your story last night, it changed my mind. As you've probably guessed, these are the matches my daughter left behind, her only relic." Ino noticed that, compared to the relief he felt after shedding a heavy burden the previous night, Old John now seemed more like someone redeemed and reborn. Even when he mentioned his daughter's belongings, there was no regret or sadness as before. "But, you gave me a whole new bag of matches, so I wanted to leave them to you, and also let the story of the little match girl live on in this land." Old John laughed heartily, a laugh that seemed to pierce the clouds. Outside the town, a modest gravel road. Though narrow, barely wide enough for a single carriage, it was the only way to the nearby city. "Old John, we're done here, really," Ino said gently. After a month of daily interaction, he understood the old man's mindset. That look was truly familiar. It was like a time when he'd worked hard all year, returning home for a brief reunion during the Lunar New Year holiday. At the end of the holiday, at the moment of parting, his elderly grandmother saw him off. She walked him from home to the front door, from the front door to the village entrance. Even after the car had driven off, the old woman remained frozen in place, unwilling to leave. "Well, I'm about to embark on a new journey, trying to catch the footsteps of spring. And you too, you're about to begin your own story. May I still hear your legend from afar. Goodbye, Old John." To avoid any melancholy of parting, Ino said goodbye and walked down the long gravel road without looking back. Old John, on the other side, didn't respond, simply standing still, waving his aged arms as if in farewell. After a while, Ino suddenly heard the distant sound of poetry behind him. It was Old John's voice, and while the tone was a little shabby, it was unmistakably the metrical rhythm of a bard. The voice was rich and resonant. Even from a distance, Ino could still clearly hear the words of the poem, "A blessing to a traveler from afar." London, by the Thames. "I never thought you had such a talent." Ino returned to his original world, intending to cook a simple lunch, rest for a while, and then go out to buy food in the afternoon. But who would have thought, when he opened his bag, he found a familiar object hidden inside, Old John's purse of gold coins. This discovery left him both amused and embarrassed. He hadn't anticipated Old John's hidden talent. He had slipped the purse into his bag without anyone noticing. While touched, he was also grateful that no one had noticed. Had they, he would never have taken it out. But now, unintentional behavior was the perfect solution. Not only had he transcended the rules of the fantasy world and obtained a bag of gold coins, but he hadn't fostered greed, the best of both worlds. As for Old John's future source of income, he wasn't worried at all. As the next protagonist in the town's puzzle, even if the entire town were wiped out, Old John would still be safe and sound. That's a relief. "Thank you, Old John." Ino looked at the gold coins before him, silently thanking him, then carefully placed the purse inside his coat. With this money, his only thought now was to sell all his second-hand belongings and buy new ones. Especially that plain robe, so worn it was patined. If he weren't so short of money, he wouldn't even pick it up if it was thrown on the ground. New robes, a new cauldron, and a room at the Leaky Cauldron. Ino calculated how to spend it, pondering the Gringotts exchange rate. A bag full of gold coins would definitely last him until graduation, provided he didn't squander it recklessly. Diagon Alley. Unlike his last hurried trip, Ino was clearly in a leisurely mood this time. Of course, he hadn't forgotten the purpose of his trip. His first stop was Gringotts, the wizarding bank chain. Entering the magnificent marble hall once again, he saw hundreds of goblins, each less than 2 feet tall, sitting behind a long row of counters, weighing coins on copper scales or carefully examining gems through eyepieces. In short, these goblins seem to have endless work to do, looking incredibly busy. I need to exchange some galleons. But first, you need to tell me the exchange rate. Ino walked up to the counter and pulled a gold coin from his pocket that old John had given him. The distinctive sound of gold instantly changed the goblin's impatient expression into one of flattery. Of course. Dear customer, Gringotts exchange rates are always transparent. That's best. Ino placed the gold coins on the counter and urged, my time is valuable. I think you know what to do. Ino's tone was a touch arrogant, but the goblin across from him wore a familiar expression. To him, the young wizard's attire was a little overly simple. But he possessed a calm and confident demeanor not often found in pure-blood children. I'll weigh and calculate it for you as soon as possible. It won't take long. The goblin's smile grew even brighter. He knew that at Gringotts, judging a client's identity required more than just their appearance. With that in mind, he immediately got to work. Color, weight, hardness. After a series of calculations, the goblin was 100% certain that the gold coin before him was pure gold. However, he was troubled by the fact that it looked like an antique. If he simply exchanged it at the gold price. After some thought, greed finally overcame reason. The goblin said cautiously, the gold coin is of considerable purity, and the total weight is 1.2 ounces. So, this coin can be exchanged for 145 galleons. Hearing this, Ino quickly calculated in his mind. He had done some research before coming here. In 1991, the international gold price was $350 per ounce, and the exchange rate between the dollar and the pound was 1.95. A little over £800 for 145 galleons is a fair price. After secretly calculating, Ino made a decision and immediately pulled out 2 more gold coins from his pocket. Exchange them for me. Unbeknownst to him, this casual action had caused the goblin to feel a little uneasy. The goblin, now a mask of pain, hesitated for a few seconds before whispering, actually, this gold coin might qualify as an antique, provided you tell me its history and... No need. It's a work of art. Just exchange it for gold, Ino interrupted. He'd considered this, but fabricating a fabricated story just to get a few more bucks would be sheer folly. After all, a few 100 grams of extra gold in the wizarding world is harmless, but the sudden appearance of an undiscovered piece of history is hard to ignore. A new book launch. A new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelist. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 Platform 9 3/4. Leaving Gringotts, pocketing a paltry sum of nearly 500 galleons, Ino couldn't help but feel a bit elated. While none of the essentials of the soul can be purchased with money, wealth often brings a sense of spiritual satisfaction. Honestly, this was the first time since he'd opened his fantasy world that he'd amassed such a large sum of gold coins, and he was inevitably a bit overjoyed. After all, his best luck in the past 2 years had been a paltry few silver coins, all within reasonable limits. I need to buy custom-made, high-end robes, a whole bottle of ink, a pet, and so on. At that moment, Ino had only one thought in mind, to spend lavishly. Being able to both earn and spend money is the secret to enjoying double happiness. 2 hours later. Outside the leaky cauldron, a young man carrying a vintage brown suitcase stood. It feels really good to be rich. Ino strolled through the streets of London, recalling the experience he'd just had. That exhilarating shopping trip was a memorable one. After spending nearly 200 galleons, he not only purchased the brand new items on his matriculation checklist, but also spent 10 galleons on the musical instrument he'd longed for, an enchanted accordion that allowed him to learn music and play it himself. After all, as a bard, without a suitable instrument, he would appear less professional and easily be looked down upon. Of course, all these items combined didn't exceed 50 galleons. The truly valuable item was the vintage leather suitcase he carried. This seamlessly extending suitcase, bearing official Ministry of Magic approval, cost a whopping 150 galleons, despite only having twice the space available. It seems that no matter where you are, the approval is often more valuable than the item itself. Ino glanced down at the suitcase in his hands. Although he felt a bit ripped off, it was his only option at the moment. This kind of special equipment was truly indispensable for a wandering traveler like him. It was not only convenient for daily use, but also provided an extra layer of security for future adventures into fantasy worlds. In the evening, Ino returned to the bridge pier. If it weren't for the books he'd bought earlier, he wouldn't have bothered to make the trip. After all, aside from a new aluminum kettle, everything else in his old apartment was generous gifts from the wealthy neighborhood. After returning to his apartment and simply packing up some daily necessities, he finally made it back to the Leaky Cauldron before dark. Ino's first act upon returning to the Leaky Cauldron was to find the owner, Tom Abbott, to rent a room for 2 months. Barring any unexpected events, he had no plans to move until school started. Now that he was no longer worried about money, there was no point in returning to the misery of living under the bridge. After all, no one was stupid. Time flowed like clockwork, sometimes moving quickly, sometimes slowly, a constant interplay of urgency and leisure. 2 months flew by. September 1st, 1991. In the morning, Ino packed all his belongings into a traceless, expandable suitcase and took one last look at the room he'd lived in for the past 2 months. With a silent farewell, he closed the door, went downstairs to say goodbye to Tom, and set off for King's Cross Station. After paying the taxi driver £7, they arrived safely at their destination. King's Cross Station, opened in 1852, is a major railway terminal in central London, boasting a considerable daily passenger flow. Ino didn't care how busy it was, he was more concerned with finding the entrance to platform 9 and 3/4. Honestly, a major transportation hub in an international city isn't as it's portrayed in movies and TV shows, a simple shot of a few gleaming pillars, anyone with decent eyes can see them. In reality, King's Cross platform is quite large. After wandering around, it took nearly 10 minutes just to find platform 9. Of course, he saw many familiar faces along the way, like Hermione, hesitantly standing next to her parents, and a boy with black eye sockets holding a pure white snowy owl. But he ignored them all. If they weren't on the same page, there was no need to get too close and cause unnecessary trouble. Finally, after several twists and turns, he arrived at platform 9. After witnessing several young wizards disappear behind the stone pillars, Ino rushed forward without hesitation. Station 9 and 3/4. The medieval-style platform and the old steam locomotive, its red and black mottled body, radiated a heavy sense of history. This feeling, so familiar. The momentary weightlessness he felt upon crossing the platform reminded him of entering a fantasy world, a similarly elusive feeling of weightlessness. But before he could reflect, a cacophony of sounds suddenly buzzed in his ears. The roar of the train's steam engine, the parting words of parents, the playful cries of young wizards, and even the inexplicable chirping of various pets. The combination of these sounds made Ino instantly want to turn and leave. Speaking of noise, if it came from far away, it would be fine, as there would be time to adjust. But this sudden cacophony was truly unbearable. I must learn silencing charms next time. I didn't expect London to have a morning market during the spring festival travel rush. Without delay, Ino grabbed his suitcase and headed for the train. He remembered this train had compartments, so if he went in early and closed the door, he'd have a bit of peace and quiet. He boarded the train. He ignored the many older girls who tried to strike up a conversation along the way. He knew this wasn't a Muggle world. Muggle girls, heartbroken, would just be alone and hesitant. At Hogwarts, the seniors were always to be trifled with. This included, but not limited to, love potions, confusion charms, even the Imperious Curse. Most importantly, the looks from these seniors frightened Ino. They weren't just expressions of affection and admiration, they were more the kind of wonder and possessive desire girls get when they see a furry pet. He didn't want to wander around the train any longer. He found an empty compartment and quickly entered. Bang! The compartment door slammed shut. Perhaps it was the magic, but even with a flimsy wooden door closed, this small compartment was enveloped in utter tranquility. Small, enclosed spaces always give people a sense of security, just like how children always want to crawl into cardboard boxes. Except for those with claustrophobia, of course. Thank you, England, thank you for your rigid, retro traditions. In the isolation room, Ino couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, feeling somewhat fortunate. Thank goodness this is Hogwarts. If it were France or Boxbuttons, my pockets would probably be stuffed with little pink slips by now. After all, across Europe, only in England, renowned for its gentlemen and ladies, do young women possess even a modicum of reserve, even if it's just superficial. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add my book to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add my book to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 16 on the train. Time ticked by. At 10:30 a.m., the old steam train gave its final roar before departure. A 2-meter-high white mist served as a silent reminder, urging the young wizards on the platform to board as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, on the other side of the platform, Mrs. Weasley was giving her usual lecture. Today's focus was on the Wheelie's youngest son, Ron Weasley, who was about to start school. Ron, study hard at Hogwarts. Don't be like George and Fred, causing trouble all day long. Do you understand? Perhaps having heard too many similar lectures, Ron nodded perfunctorily, yet still managed to respond appropriately. Okay, Mom. I'll stay away from George and Fred. If anything goes wrong, I'll go to Percy. I'll look up to him as my role model. That's for the best. Mrs. Weasley nodded gratifiedly. She was aware of Ron's perfunctory nature, but as a mother of 7, she had long since learned to see through things without saying anything. And compared to George and Fred, at least Ron's attitude was relatively respectful. September 1st, 1991, 11 a.m. The Hogwarts Express departed from platform 9 3/4 as scheduled. Inside the train compartment, Ino leaned against the window, taking in the scenery on either side while feeling the old steam train warm up before accelerating. Express? Huh? I wonder where this confidence comes from. He was now skeptical that this antique from the last century could even reach 30 kilometers per hour. Click. The compartment door was pushed open from the outside. There's only one person here. Let's kick him out, and this place will be ours. Hearing this, Ino looked up in surprise. He hadn't originally intended to monopolize the entire compartment. After all, on a train like this, where seats aren't reserved, you basically sit wherever you can. However, he'd never seen someone so arrogant as to kick someone out just by pushing the door open. As the compartment door swung open, well, he was tall and strong, so he had the confidence to be so arrogant. Despite his opponent's size advantage, Ino wasn't about to let him down. After all, if someone was labeled a pushover when arriving in a strange place, trouble would inevitably follow. Better to go all out and confront him head-on. He might get hurt, but at least no one would dare mess with him again. Chasing someone away? Your territory? You could try. Ino casually slammed his wand on the table, the loud noise making the large man across from him flinch. Just as he thought he was about to attack, another voice rang from outside. Gull, get out of the way. I've always told you to never forget the graces and manners of a pureblood. Perhaps genuinely frightened, Goyle dodged to the side with a speed that belied his size. Ino looked over and realized who was being so arrogant. Pale skin, platinum blonde hair, and a slicked back hairstyle that didn't suit his age, he was undoubtedly a swashbuckling young master. Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. Who are you then? Perhaps it was the other man's well-tailored plain robes, or perhaps it was his previous steely courage, but Malfoy didn't immediately launch into a mindless attack. Ino Swinburne. Ino replied calmly. Swinburne? I don't recall there being such a surname in England. Are you from another country? Perhaps. I've been wondering since I was born, but I've never set foot in my homeland. This was a half-truth, for he knew exactly what Malfoy was asking, simply to determine the difference between muggles and purebloods. But immediately assigning a person a certain nature or alignment was probably something only a fool would do. The best approach was to remain ambiguous and let the other person figure it out for themselves. Sorry, but I think you're from a pureblood family in Germany. And, your eyes are quite unique. Malfoy spoke his mind. In his opinion, amber eyes and black hair were likely Germanic in origin. As for whether or not someone was pureblood, Malfoy's opinion was surprisingly consistent with the Gringotts goblins. Besides, in Malfoy's opinion, muggles couldn't give birth to a boy as beautiful as the one before him. No need to apologize. I'm enjoying my free and unfettered life right now. Malfoy's attitude slightly changed Ino's usual perspective. But I don't care where I come from. My surname and birth can't make me nobler than others. True nobility lies in being superior to my past self. Having been a bard for 2 years, Ino was adept at delivering these wise and polite remarks. I'm now convinced that you and I are of the same kind, Malfoy said, extending his right hand. Ino neither denied nor agreed with this assumption. But when faced with a handshake symbolizing the Malfoy friendship, he didn't spurn it with the savior's ruthlessness. After all, it's best not to hit someone who smiles. If you can't find a suitable compartment, I don't mind you sitting here, but if you're still planning on kicking people out. Before Ino could finish, Malfoy interrupted, Goyle has never been very bright. Don't bother with him. As he spoke, Malfoy pulled Goyle over and patted him on the shoulder. Goyle was playing along, standing there with a simple, goofy grin on his face, which at first glance did seem a bit dull. Ino couldn't help but laugh at this hilarious scene, and since he wasn't going to make a big deal about it, he extended the invitation again. Don't stand around at the door. If you'd gotten in earlier, you might have found a vacant compartment. Right now, having a seat is good enough. Malfoy didn't hesitate, plopped down next to Ino, and began directing his 2 lackeys to carry the luggage. Half an hour later. The antique steam train finally seemed to have finished warming up, its speed suddenly increasing. The view outside the window went from the previous lag to the current VIP smooth broadcast. After half an hour of conversation, Ino had gained some intuitive understanding of Malfoy. So far, the 11-year-old didn't seem inherently bad, even less ruthless than Crabbe, who was standing next to him. Similarly, the brief exchange helped Malfoy gradually let down his guard, becoming more familiar with each other, and the atmosphere in the compartment became increasingly harmonious. Ino, I heard the boy who lived is also on this car. Want to go see it with me? Malfoy asked. I prefer to read quietly rather than meet celebrities. Faced with this invitation, which he knew would cause trouble, Ino decisively declined. Well, you look more like a Ravenclaw than a Slytherin. Malfoy replied with a smile, and then, along with Goyle and Crabbe, they left the compartment together, not forgetting to close the wooden door behind them. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 17 A Brief Test. After watching Malfoy and the other 2 leave, Ino leaned back for a nap, enjoying the quiet of the moment. After all, he'd been up and about since 8 in the morning, and a nap would help him regain his energy and prepare him for the sorting ceremony that evening. Speaking of the sorting ceremony, Ino immediately rejected Harry's arbitrary, forced sorting. Perhaps it was because he'd been doing divination for so long that he now preferred to let fate determine which house he would be placed in. Similarly, he hadn't forgotten Snape's earlier mention of Occlumency, and this seemed like a good opportunity to test it out, to see if the sorting hat could still have a good conversation with Occlumency. Outside the car window, fields sped by. As the neatly arranged fields slowly faded, they gave way to lush forests, winding rivers, and verdant hills. Time seemed to have been snatched away by some mysterious force, and hours flew by in a flash. Ino opened his sparse eyes and looked out the window, only to find that it was now completely dark. Mountains and trees framed the deep purple sky, making it impossible to tell where he was. His sleep was also fitful, lasting from noon to dusk. His gaze drifted towards the compartment. Oh. Still looking so gloomy, Ino thought to himself. Ever since he returned from lunch, Malfoy had been sullen, his expression akin to someone who, after 3 years of online chatting, had finally met in person, only to have their hopes dashed. Perhaps at first, Malfoy truly wanted to be friends with Harry, but he'd forgotten that the greatest torment in the world is to love and despise him simultaneously. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on board, and we'll take you to school. Just as Ino sighed, an announcement echoed from the carriage, and the train slowed noticeably. 10 minutes later. The train has stopped. If you don't plan to get off and miss the start of term dinner, we'll have to meet again next year. With that, Ino ignored the 3 people beside him and headed for the door. He and Malfoy didn't have a deep friendship, the mention of him was purely due to their brief encounter in the same carriage. Pushing open the compartment, the once empty aisle was now crammed with young wizards emerging one after another, shoving and shoving their way toward the door. Fortunately, his compartment was relatively far back, So he didn't have to squeeze into the center of the crowd, he could just follow the flow and move forward slowly. Hogsmeade Station. The last stop on the Hogwarts Express, a very small, old platform. First years. First years, come this way, all of you, come closer to me. Harry, come over here. On the platform, Ino looked over and saw a giant at least 10 feet tall with a massive beard. Long time no see. Rubeus Hagrid. With a soft sigh, he also walked towards Hagrid. Meanwhile, above the sea of buzzing heads, Hagrid held a medieval revolving lantern. The magical orange flames within the lantern shone remarkably brightly in the pitch-black night, framing his tangled beard and massive frame with uncanny clarity. Led by Hagrid, the first years, like migrating sturgeons, inched their way along the steep, narrow path. Perhaps because of the recent rain, the road was incredibly slippery, and they constantly had to watch out for vines. The journey was a perfect example of stumbling and falling. All around them was pitch black, save for a glimmer of light from Hagrid's revolving lantern at the front. He couldn't help but sigh at the surroundings. He couldn't understand why, considering Halloween boasts countless floating pumpkins and lanterns, it was pitch black here. He didn't need bright lights, but at least they could install some streetlights. Ino picked up his wand, waved it gently, and whispered, "Burning flames." A flame suddenly erupted from the tip of the Elder Wand, quickly expanding to the size of a fist before hovering steadily at the end. Long years of magical practice finally yielded their fruits in this moment. From afar, it looked like a small torch had suddenly lit on a dark path. The rising flame radiated a warm glow, instantly dispelling the surrounding darkness and chill. Swinburne. Ino vaguely thought he heard someone call from behind him and instinctively turned to look, but the distance was pitch black and he saw nothing. Anyone who has experienced wilderness survival knows that torches are lit in the dark only to illuminate others, as the torch's holder's vision is often limited by the flames. Looks like it's either Hermione or Hannah. Although Ino couldn't see the person clearly, he knew that there were only two girls he knew here. Aside from Hermione, whom he'd met during divination, the only other person was Hannah, the Iron Hat King, whom he'd met during their time at the Leaky Cauldron. Ignoring the envious glances of the young wizards around him, Ino continued on his way, wand raised. He soon regretted his actions. Humans' natural attraction to light made the young wizards unconsciously swarm around him. Stop crowding. Hey. I'm talking to you, stop hanging on me. After a flurry of activity, Ino finally managed to restore order among the young wizards, but a wave of fear welled up in his heart. If a stampede broke out because of him, well, they'd probably skip Hogwarts and go straight to Azkaban. Quiet. Little ones, turn this corner and you'll see Hogwarts for the first time. Hagrid's booming voice lifted everyone's spirits. They'd gone through so much trouble just to get to the castle. A few minutes later, they crossed the slippery path and arrived at the edge of a dark lake. Across the lake, high on a hillside, stood a majestic castle, its spires cascading, its gleaming windows like stars twinkling against the night sky. Remember, no more than 4 people per boat. Hagrid shouted, pointing to a fleet of small boats moored on the shore. While the others hesitated, Ino was the first to board the nearest boat. His example proved powerful. After seeing him board, the other young wizards followed suit, inevitably leading to a flurry of activity. Everyone aboard. Hagrid called, making sure no one was left behind before heading for the last, lone boat. Let's go. The boats, one after another, sailed across the mirror-like surface of the lake, moving without wind, towards the other shore. Did you cast a fire spell just now? Ino heard the familiar voice again from the boat, finally identifying its owner this time. Miss Granger. Was my divination accurate? I'm asking about your spell. Hermione corrected. I know, but before that, I have to be responsible for my divination. After all, I took your money. You, humph. Stingy. Hermione bit her lip lightly. She was really angry now. This was completely different from what she had expected. Who would have thought that instead of discussing magic, he would be obsessed with a £1 divination? A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket. Please add it to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket. Chapter 18. Hello, Hogwarts. The boat drifted quietly across the Black Lake. Ino, seeing Hermione's sudden silence, was also glad for the quiet. Compared to Malfoy, He really didn't want to get too involved with someone like Hermione, who was at the center of the story. But things didn't go as he wished. After a few minutes of silence, he heard the brown-haired girl beside him muttering to herself. I clearly had forgotten about that incident. Besides, our meeting here doesn't explain it all. Although it was a disguised surrender, Ino still didn't want to talk to her. After all, this girl had been a bit aggressive in her later years. However, Hermione didn't intend to stop there. With her eyes fixed on the lake, she suddenly shouted, "Yes! Your divination is very accurate. a pound is no problem. You deserve it, Mr. Swinburne." Ino was startled by the sudden high pitch. He also heard a hint of grievance and tears in Hermione's voice. "Okay. I just used the fire charm," Ino replied. In this situation, if he remained silent, it would feel like he was bullying a little girl. I knew it. The illumination charm produces white light, and orange light can only be achieved with a fire charm. But how do you get it to stay on your wand? I tried it during summer vacation, but it was like, well, a less effective lighter. Hermione, completely detached from her previous dejection, launched into a flurry of discussions about magic. Well, the fire charm's original purpose was to give wizards a ready-to-use flame. Your description of it as a lighter is actually quite apt. Ino deliberately slowed his speech. He noticed that Hermione's hands kept unconsciously clutching her robes as she spoke. Psychologically, this is a sign of internal tension. It's understandable that an 11-year-old girl would be nervous in an unfamiliar environment. Thinking of this, Ino couldn't help but feel a pang of regret for his earlier indifference. After all, she was just a girl who had left her parents. Miss Granger, you've probably read the beginner's standard book of spells. When it comes to commanding language, no one can match the Bard. Although Ino was only an apprentice, he controlled the flow of the conversation quite well, and with just a few words, Hermione gradually relaxed. Call me Hermione. As for the beginner's standard book of spells, I finished it during the summer vacation. Time slipped by as they chatted. The boat carried everyone through the ivy curtains covering the cliff face and arrived at a platform resembling a dock. Under Hagrid's guidance, they journeyed along a cobblestone path for several minutes before finally arriving at the castle. Standing before a massive oak door, Hagrid raised his massive fist and pounded on it. Bang, bang, bang. The door swung open, and a tall, thin witch emerged. Some people brought their own laughs, while others carried speakers. But the wizard in emerald green robes and a pointed hat, though he said nothing, simply looked so stern that he could not help but instill a sense of oppression in all the young wizards. The moment before, the scene, which had been somewhat lively, suddenly fell silent. Thank you, Hagrid. I'll take over from now on. As the head of Gryffindor, Professor McGonagall knew these young wizards all too well. If she didn't show some strength and calm them down from the start, who knows how much more mischievous they would become. It would be very difficult to discipline them then. First of all, welcome to Hogwarts, Professor McGonagall said solemnly, waving her wand. The towering oak doors behind her flew open like a lion's mouth, ready to roar. The sight shuddered at the young wizards. Ino even saw a chubby boy beside him, who looked as if he was about to cry. It was hard not to praise Professor McGonagall. This method really had the freshmen completely under control. Now, keep quiet and follow me. With that, Professor McGonagall turned and walked towards the castle. Behind her, all the young wizards also consciously formed a column and followed her silently, not even daring to look around. They walked all the way to the side hall of the Great Hall. The start of term dinner is about to begin, but before that, you must first determine your respective houses, which are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. There is no distinction between superior and inferior houses. They all have their own glorious history and have nurtured many outstanding wizards. Professor McGonagall glanced at the young wizards below, paused for a few seconds, and then continued, sorting is a tradition of Hogwarts, and it is also one of the most important things in your life, because it represents your life and study for the next 7 years. Professor McGonagall said in a serious tone. Now, you wait here quietly for a moment. I'm going to prepare for the sorting ceremony. Remember, wait quietly. As Professor McGonagall left, the young wizards breathed a sigh of relief. There was no way they could bear the pressure of a powerful wizard. However, the nature of youth is always lively. A few minutes after Professor McGonagall left the side hall, the place returned to its usual life. Everyone was whispering. At first, they spoke tentatively, But when they found no one was paying attention, their voices gradually increased, creating a lively chatter. "Ino, which house do you want to go into?" "I'd like Gryffindor, where Headmaster Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard of this century, lives. Ravenclaw is also good. The books say only the truly intelligent are sorted into Ravenclaw." Hearing the familiar voice beside him, Ino couldn't help but rub his brow. He couldn't understand why Hermione was so talkative. She'd been talking all the way on the boat, and now she hadn't said enough? The books clearly showed her as a cool and intelligent girl. "I don't know. It doesn't matter how they sort us, as long as they don't skip ahead and advance to a higher grade." However, this casual response made Hermione's eyes light up as if she had discovered a secret. "Advanced? Isn't Hogwarts a 7-year program? There's also advanced education. That's for the future. You should be more concerned with the present." He already regretted even bothering with Hermione, especially now that he knew her attributes. But the future is also the present, so what exactly is skipping ahead and advancing to a higher grade? Hogwarts history never records such a thing, Hermione insisted, still undeterred. Faced with Hermione's relentless pursuit, just as Ino was about to make up an excuse to evade him, Professor McGonagall returned to the side hall. Needless to say, a single glance was enough to silence the freshman, as if under a spell. The entire side hall was utterly silent. "Now, everyone, form a single file and follow me. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please vote for it. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly ticket." Chapter 19, Unexpected Sorting. The young wizards obediently lined up in single file, silently following Professor McGonagall's lead as they entered the hall. They were greeted by a magical, magnificent great hall. Inside, the other senior students sat quietly around long tables, divided by their respective houses. Countless candles floating in the air provided ample illumination. Honestly, the solemn atmosphere was enough to make even Ino feel a tinge of pressure, not just for the freshmen. Not to mention the professors in the guest seats. Simply being watched by hundreds of eyes at the long table was enough to make one feel uneasy. But after all, he had experienced many occasions, and after a brief moment of shock, Ino quickly recovered, even taking a moment to glance at the legendary enchanted ceiling. Perhaps because of himself, he hadn't heard Hermione's domineering introduction to the history of Hogwarts to Ron. Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall had gently lowered a stool in front of the freshman, and then the enigmatic sorting hat appeared. He listened with great interest to the hat's rap. If he had to choose the most fascinating thing about Hogwarts, the sorting hat would undoubtedly be on the list. Passed down for millennia, possessing wisdom and memory, even possessing thoughts and an independent personality, such a hat would surely be a legendary figure in fairy tales, fables, and folklore. The hat could speak and even sing, leaving the freshmen stunned. They finally understood how the Hogwarts houses were actually sorted. It wasn't the freshmen's fault for their lack of experience. Even Malfoy, a pureblood, couldn't have known about the sorting in advance. The sorting ceremony, where seniors tricked the freshmen, had practically become a Hogwarts tradition. After the sorting hat finished its song and the applause died down, Professor McGonagall, who had been waiting nearby, slowly unfolded the parchment. "Now, I've called a name. Please step forward. Hannah Abbott." Professor McGonagall had barely finished speaking when a timid blonde girl emerged from the crowd, her ponytail swaying back and forth as she moved. Old acquaintance. Ino thought to himself. His stay at the Leaky Cauldron before the start of the semester had given him a good understanding of this generous little witch with a fondness for storytelling. Of course, everything has its pros and cons. Compared to Hannah's warmth and clinginess, the bar owner, Tom, seemed a bit unsympathetic. Ino had noticed more than once that old Tom always stared at him with a wary eye. But back to the point. With Hannah sitting upright on the high stool, the 1991 sorting ceremony officially began. Time passed, and one by one, the new students donned the sorting hat. Because his last name came later in the year, Ino had the privilege of observing the ceremony from the sidelines. It wasn't limited to Harry's awkward sorting hat situation, Malfoy's swift arrival in Slytherin, Neville the Sword Master, Seamus the explosive genius, and so on. It's worth noting that Hermione ultimately made it to Gryffindor, just as the books suggest. During this time, Ino discovered something interesting, one that also cleared up a long-held mystery. After the sorting, The young wizard's collars and sleeves would change to the house's base color. Otherwise, everyone would just buy plain robes and then manually embroider them later? That seemed unrealistic. P.S. The color-changing sorting robes are a reference to the official mobile game, Hogwarts Mystery. Meanwhile, as Professor McGonagall called the roll, the ranks of freshmen gradually dwindled, and the remaining students still unsorted were few and far between. Ino Swinburne. Upon hearing her name, Ino calmly made her way to the head table, a gentle, well-behaved smile playing across her face. His graceful demeanor, paired with those pure, penetrating eyes, earned him a significant following among those who favored him. Following this maneuver, Professor McGonagall and the other heads of house and the main seat all expressed relief. After all teachers appreciate well-behaved children. Of course, there are always exceptions. For example, another member of the main seat, Slytherin head of house, Severus Snape, who had been impassive throughout the sorting ceremony, now revealed a rare hint of a sneer. His expression was like someone watching a well-known opera. While the other audience members were weeping in deception, he remained completely sober. As the person involved, Ino was putting on a desperate facade. He wanted to see if the sorting hat could still engage him in conversation, if it could even read his thoughts. "Relax, it's nothing." Professor McGonagall soothed him gently from the stool. "Thank you, Professor." Ino replied with a shy smile. He sat down gently on the stool, appearing relaxed on the surface, yet his mind was intensely focused. But the next second, before the sorting hat even touched the tip of Ino's hair, it already had its answer. "Slytherin." The hat screamed at the top of its lungs. "Pa! Pa! Pa!" The Slytherin table erupted in applause. Some of the younger girls from Snake House clapped until their palms turned red, unknowingly. "It's over." Ino's heart skipped a beat. He was completely paralyzed, and countless words were stuck in his mouth. But at Professor McGonagall's signal, he resigned himself to his fate and walked towards the Slytherin table. Honestly, Slytherin wasn't a big deal, and he never looked down on any other house. But the problem was, the sorting hat had done this. Not only had his plans thwarted, but it had also drawn a lot of unnecessary attention. Ino was practically suicidal. After all, he had just watched the entire sorting ceremony. Of all the new students, no one had ever been so easily chosen by a single touch of their hair. Even Malfoy, the fastest sorter, he put on the hat, and it took him a second to be sorted into Slytherin. Ino walked towards the Slytherin table, head bowed. He could already picture the scene. Dumbledore's meaningful look, even the curious expressions of Quirrell and Voldemort, just thinking about it made him feel uneasy. Of course, it wasn't that the headmaster was evil. Ino had never questioned Dumbledore's character. This was a magical world, after all. No white wizard was dark and malicious. Even Snape, a master of Occlumency, was meant to atone and protect, not to kill. That being said, he was more concerned about the headmaster's attention and concern than Quirrell, who was expendable. If that were the case, then the next few years of school life would undoubtedly be incredibly exciting. This whole thing is. At that moment, Ino just wanted to sit down at the long table, quickly integrate into Slytherin, and then keep a low profile for half a semester. Perhaps once Quirrell started making a big fuss, Dumbledore would have no time to pay attention to anything else. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to my collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 20 Pansy Parkinson. Chapter 20 Pansy Parkinson. As he walked, Ino ignored the various strange looks from the crowd and sat down at the Slytherin table. Seriously, I knew on the train you'd be in Slytherin. He had barely sat down when he heard whispers from beside him. From the tone of voice, he knew who it was. "Please be quiet and behave yourself, Mr. Malfoy." Ino didn't want to say a word, let alone chat with a shrew. Tisk. There you go again. Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. Besides, being polite is only for others to see, Malfoy said nonchalantly. "Now you really need to be quiet," Ino said, signaling Malfoy with her eyes to look towards the guest of honor. The sorting ceremony had already concluded. Dumbledore, the headmaster, had stood up, beaming at the students before opening his arms. It seemed nothing could make him happier than to see the students gathered together. "Welcome. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts to start the new school year. Before the feast begins, please allow me to say a few words, idiots. Crybabies. Scum. Twist. Thank you all. After saying these words, Dumbledore sat down, and everyone applauded enthusiastically. Of course, there was also much discussion about the meaning of the headmaster's words, and it wasn't limited to Ravenclaw. Even Slytherin and Hufflepuff teams were whispering among themselves. How idle. Ino had no interest in these discussions. Compared to guessing riddles, the long table was filled with a dazzling array of delicious food. Just before him, there was roast beef, pork chops, a whole roast chicken, bacon and ham, fried lamb chops, French fries, boiled potatoes, char-grilled chips, Yorkshire puddings, pea shoots, carrots, gravy, ketchup, a variety of breads, and so on. But this was a long table, and beyond it lay countless more delicacies. Gluttony is no different from greed. Ino glanced at the table next to him. A red-haired freshman was devouring 2 chicken drumsticks with relish, looking as if he'd never had a full meal at home. He shook his head speechlessly, then picked up the plate next to him, selected a few nearby dishes, and leisurely began to enjoy a sumptuous meal. "Do you know that pure-blood scum?" A crisp voice called out. "Are you talking to me?" Ino raised his head helplessly. He had intended to ignore the other person, but the questioning caused the surrounding snakes to stop eating. "Parkinson. Pansy Parkinson." The voice belonged to a woman with short black hair, fair skin, and delicate features, but her thin cheeks gave her a certain harshness. "Ino Swinburne." Out of courtesy, Ino put down his cutlery and looked at the girl across from him. His impression of Parkinson lingered more on Malfoy. After all, the woman in the book who had loved Malfoy for 7 years only to marry someone else was somewhat regrettable. But regardless, now wasn't the right time to chat? Ever since the dinner began, Ino had been feeling the constant, almost imperceptible, glances. Now, the feeling was even more pronounced, but he'd made up his mind. No matter how you looked at me, I wouldn't raise my head in response, even if I could pinpoint the exact location of the gaze. I only know a few people at Hogwarts, not including that person just now. Now, can I have dinner in peace, Miss Parkinson? Ino replied quickly, not waiting for a reply as he picked up his plate and lowered his head to finish the remaining half of his steak. For a moment, the atmosphere was a bit chilly. But that was only superficial. What Ino didn't see was that his cold words had sparked a spark of excitement in the eyes of many Slytherin girls. Time slipped by unnoticed. The dinner was coming to an end unnoticed. As the last young wizard put down the cutlery, the 4 long tables in the hall became as sparkling as before under the effect of magic, as if the delicious food just now was just a mirage. Dumbledore stood up again, and all the young wizards in the audience kept quiet tacitly, their eyes once again focused on the guest of honor seats. Now that everyone is full, while everyone still has some energy, I want to give a few more instructions on things to note for the new school year. First-year students, please note that students are prohibited from entering the Forbidden Forest behind the castle. I hope you will remember this well. Of course, this also applies to students in other grades. Dumbledore's eyes swept over the Gryffindor table. George and Fred exchanged a glance with an expression that said, "I'm very obedient. Mr. Filch, our castle warden, has asked me to remind everyone that magic is prohibited in the corridors between classes. There are also 127 new prohibited items. Those interested can visit Mr. Filch's office. Quidditch audits will begin in the 2nd week of this term. Students interested in joining the house team should contact Madam Hooch." Dumbledore finished his words in one breath, then paused briefly. "Finally, I must tell you that anyone who wishes to avoid accidents, pain, or tragic death should avoid the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor." As soon as he finished speaking, an eerie silence descended upon the great hall. The first years were genuinely frightened, while the older students were surprised by the headmaster's unusual behavior. Perhaps the 2nd and 3rd years didn't feel anything, but the 6th and 7th years, they were even more curious about the headmaster's sudden change. As for the 4th floor corridor, they had no interest in it at all. They had walked it dozens, if not hundreds, of times over the years. So he's bullying an honest person. Ino thought speechlessly. Others, when stinging, fear being caught, but Dumbledore, on the other hand, slapped the hook right in their faces. It was fortunate this was targeting Gryffindor. If it had been Ravenclaw, the young eagles might have been intimidated at first, but once they came to their senses, none of them would have been fooled. And now, before we retire, let us sing the school song. Dumbledore flicked his wand gently, and a long golden ribbon appeared in the air. The ribbon then transformed into lines of text, revealing the lyrics of the school song. "Everyone choose a favorite tune," Dumbledore said. "Ready, sing. Hogwarts. Hogwarts. Hogwarts." Ino, with a grim expression, followed behind the Slytherin group. Surrounding him were the freshmen of this year's Serpentine House. Singing, or rather, chanting, is arguably the bard's greatest skill, but they also have a deep dislike for tuneless singing. But now, listening to the diverse accents around him, even the school song mingled with the funeral march, Ino suddenly felt the urge to cover his ears and flee the scene. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 21, Classes Everywhere. After everyone left the Great Hall, a tall figure with a prefect's badge on his chest stepped out from the Slytherin ranks. "All freshmen, this way. Move closer to me." Adhering to the principle of keeping a low profile, Ino followed a new student in front of him, slowly making his way towards the prefect. However, things unfolded unexpectedly. When the Slytherin freshman lined up in 2 columns, the prefect placed him at the front. Looking at Malfoy, who was also in the front row, with a look of as it should be, Ino felt like saying nothing. He had originally decided to keep a low profile and not draw attention, but he hadn't expected that just moments after being tricked by the Sorting Hat, he was being tricked by Slytherin again in the space of a meal. The incident had already happened, and although he was forced to take center stage, he knew the only thing he could do now was to do nothing and remain quiet. As for quietly retreating or rashly asking why, it was probably because he was afraid he wouldn't steal enough attention. It's worth noting that the Gryffindors nearby, whether to challenge or simply follow suit, also placed their newly drawn SSR savior, Harry, at the top of the freshman class. After separating from the other houses, the Slytherin freshmen, led by their prefects, made their way down the winding marble staircase that flanks the corridor. As they made their way, Ino kept a close eye on his surroundings. Well, the basement was dim, the staircases maze-like, the only means of illumination being scattered torches on the walls. The faint glow, far from providing warmth, only added a touch of eeriness. He finally understood the rumor that the Slytherin common room was a converted dungeon. Given the atmosphere, calling it a dungeon might be an exaggeration, calling it a death cell might be closer. A few minutes later, the prefect leading the way stopped before a stone wall and turned to look at the freshmen. "I guess you all have memorized the route you just came from? The first step to enter the Slytherin common room is to find this stone wall accurately. What about the second step? I mean, how to open it?" Malfoy asked calmly. Malfoy may have wanted to pretend to be mature and steady, but he forgot the basic facial expression management during the conversation. Just that arrogant look seemed to say that he was the only one in the freshman team who was qualified to speak. Ino moved his feet calmly. He really wanted to give Malfoy the Best Supporting Actor award. He was being used without knowing it. The prefect opposite obviously wanted to give the freshman a warning, and was worried that no one would respond. Sure enough. "Very good. That's what I'm going to say next." The prefect glanced at Malfoy with interest, then turned to look at all the freshmen. "The second step to entering the common room is to speak the correct password. But if I catch anyone leaking the password to outsiders, hey, I'd be happy to let them see the Slytherin tradition of punishing leakers." At this, the prefect's previous gentle demeanor shifted, becoming stern and stern. Against the backdrop of the firelight, he looked even more sinister. Seeing the freshman's lingering fear, he knew his goal of asserting his authority had been achieved. All that remained was the carrot. Thinking of this, the prefect's previous coldness shifted again, and a warm smile spread across his face. "Of course, you've passed the Sorting Hat and are now Slytherins, so I trust you will never betray secrets. Now, listen to me, the password for the common room this month is, glory. Boom boom." As the prefect finished his words, the stone wall opposite him slowly opened, revealing a crack just wide enough for one person to pass through. From a broader perspective, the whole thing looked much like the passage from the Leaky Cauldron to Diagon Alley, essentially no different. The freshmen, following the previous order, passed through the stone wall one by one. Mysterious. That was Ino's first impression of the Slytherin common room. The entire hall was rectangular, its narrow passageway lined with luxurious chairs and velvet-covered sofas. The most striking feature was the transparent wall at the end of the hall, revealing the black lake beyond. Looking closely, one could even see schools of fish swimming at the bottom. The Slytherin common room, adorned with a dark green hue, especially against a backdrop of the black lake, gave it an eerie, shipwreck-like feel. Once the freshmen had acclimated themselves, the prefects began assigning dormitories. Perhaps due to the castle's vast size, or perhaps the plentiful dungeons, the Slytherin dormitory arrangements were incredibly diverse, ranging from 2 to a room for as few as 6. It was clear here that Slytherin's privileged status was evident in every aspect, almost as if it were a well-established rule. Ino Swinburne, Draco Malfoy. As expected, he was called first again, and once again, assigned to the same dormitory as Malfoy. Destroy. I'm tired. Ino no longer cared about the crowd's reactions. He wanted to know what had gone wrong with Slytherin, a school based on bloodline, to allow a stranger named Swinburne to be placed ahead of Malfoy. He knew the origin of his surname well. It all came from an obscure storybook that the orphanage nurse had dug up on her 6th birthday. Half an hour later, after the prefect finished assigning dormitories and giving some other instructions, he left. His departure brought renewed energy to the freshmen. The freshmen stopped standing stiffly and began chatting freely. Several even wandered over to chat with some older students seated on the sofas. Their similar facial features and nearly identical hair color made it easy to tell the connection. Ino had no interest in joining this fraternal meeting. He just wanted to get back to his dorm as soon as possible and then quietly reflect on the almost farcical sorting. He ignored the inquiring eyes around him and walked straight to the newly assigned dorm. Meanwhile, after Ino left, a large-scale discussion broke out in the common room. Draco, you and Swinburne were in the same compartment on the train? What kind of person is he? Pansy suddenly asked. Pansy seemed to have asked what everyone was thinking. The environment, which had been a little noisy just now, suddenly became much quieter. Even some senior students looked at Malfoy with curiosity, as if they were looking forward to hearing some secrets next. On the other hand, after seeing everyone's attention, Malfoy swallowed back the refusal he had originally intended to say. He was now enjoying the feeling of being the center of attention. Ahem. Although I don't know much about Ino, the moment I met him, I knew we were the same kind, true Slytherins. For the next few moments, Malfoy recounted as much as he could, sharing his understanding of Ino and his various speculations, deductions, and assumptions. Of course, all these speculations and assumptions, after some processing, became the so-called established facts, a new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22, The First Divination in the Castle. HU. Just after entering the dorm, before he could even find his bed, Ino sneezed several times. He knew without a second thought that there was going to be a lot of discussion about him. After all, he'd outshone Malfoy at the sorting ceremony, stunning the entire Slytherin community. Well, to be expected, it's only natural to be talked about. Ino rubbed his sore nose and surveyed the privileged double room. There was an emerald green cashmere carpet, 2 separate single beds that exuded the scent of pinewood, and thick, dark green curtains. Just a side view revealed they were at least 2 centimeters thick. It was easy to imagine the tranquility the occupants would enjoy once the curtains were drawn. The lamps, the ceiling, the bookshelves, the desks, the sofa, everything in the dorm was either green or cool. Well, this is very Slytherin. Ino found a nameplate with his surname on one of the beds and rolled over to lie down. The soft bed made him forget all his troubles for a moment. Gryffindor common room. The red lion flag representing the house hung in the air. Several long tables were neatly arranged in the spacious lounge, with comfortable sofas and armchairs placed beside the tables. A dark brown fireplace was on the left, and a life-size portrait of a witch was on the right. If the Slytherin common room gave people a sense of mystery and coldness, then the Gryffindor common room gave people a sense of warmth and brightness. I didn't expect it was just a hat. I thought I was fighting a troll. George and Fred have fooled me again. In the dormitory, Ron sat on his bed and complained. At that moment, another roommate, Dean Thomas, couldn't help but say, "Be content. At least you have brothers at school, 3 of them. Unlike us, we're probably going to get bullied all the time." Although Dean was of mixed race, his father died young, and he'd lived with his mother in the Muggle world. He was well aware of the huge difference between having brothers and not having them at school. Harry, standing beside him, nodded rapidly. "That's right, Dudley's like that. He never dared to bully a classmate with a brother, even if that classmate looked skinny." "Well, you might have a point," Ron said nonchalantly. He didn't want to continue the conversation, mainly because he hadn't expected Harry to side with the others this time. But ending the topic didn't mean silence. After a moment's thought, Ron initiated a new round of discussion. "Did you see that today? That black-haired Slytherin, he was sorted faster than Malfoy. Look. The sorting hat didn't even bother to touch that guy. I always thought Malfoy was bad enough. After all, his whole family are dark wizards. My grandma said that house doesn't determine a person's goodness or badness, it's the heart that determines it." Neville, who had been silent until then, bravely expressed his opinion. "What else did your grandma say?" "She was just comforting you, worried that you'd be sorted into Hufflepuff and then become depressed," Ron said without turning around. "But I think Neville has a point. It's just like when I was sorted into classes in elementary school. I didn't see how the people in the excellent class were superior." Andy, as usual, was the devil's advocate. Seeing the tense atmosphere in the dormitory, Harry quickly interrupted, "Aren't you sleepy? Tomorrow's first class is Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class. Don't we need to review the textbooks beforehand?" It was hard to imagine, perhaps because he had just arrived at Hogwarts, that the concept of reviewing textbooks was still on Harry's mind. "Come on, men. Do you think they'll let us conjure dragons right off the bat? At most, we'll be able to conjure an apple or something. All we need is the right spell and a wave of our wand." Ron reiterated his opinion. Harry, on the other hand, thought for a few seconds before nodding in agreement. Knowing nothing about magic, he preferred to trust Ron, who had grown up in the wizarding world. "You're right, Ron. There's no way they'll let us conjure dragons right off the bat." On the first night of school, Harry completely abandoned the idea of studying for his textbooks. Slytherin dormitories. "I can't lie down anymore. I'll be ruined if I do." Ino closed his eyes, muttering to himself. He realized that the bed in the dorm seemed to have a magical quality that made it impossible to get up. Its softness was even comparable to the swan-feathered bed he'd found when he'd been a guest at the Duke's house in the fantasy world. And so, about 10 minutes passed. Ino finally freed himself from the bed's constraints and sat at his desk. Glancing back at the enchanted bed, he vowed never to touch it again except for actual sleep. He replayed his day's events in his mind, replaying them one by one, from the moment he arrived at 9-3/4 station. Despite careful reflection, he still couldn't pinpoint the problem. Since reasoning can't defeat magic, then magic must defeat magic. Ino unbuttoned his shirt and pulled out an antique dice from an inner pocket. "I won't be in danger this school year. I won't be in danger this school year." After repeating the divination 3 times in his mind, he decisively rolled the dice. Ding, ding, ding. The wooden dice spun in circles, scraping against the tabletop with a crisp sound. On the tabletop, the dice continued to spin. 10 seconds later. "Huh? Sleep." Ino put the dice away and walked towards his bed without looking back. Such decisiveness was entirely due to the divination's results. The dice had just rolled a row 5, meaning his probability of safety for the entire school year was a staggering 80%. After 2 years and countless divination practices, he knew this result was incredibly close to perfect. As for the legendary 1 and 6 above, well, he hadn't rolled those numbers since he first got the dice. This was understandable, as there's no such thing as absolute success or absolute failure in anything, so an 80% probability was already quite rare. After all, most of his previous divinations had only come up with 3 and 4, just rough estimates. Getting back to the point. After receiving such a reassuring result, Ino felt as if a burden had been lifted from him. He comfortably sank into bed, completely immersed in the soft blankets. At that moment, he once again experienced a long-lost sense of relaxation, just like when he'd traveled around with Teacher Hans, free from worry and worry. Perhaps it was the release of my thoughts, or perhaps it was the exhaustion of a long day on the train. Before long, the sound of even breathing could be heard from beneath the dark green bed curtains. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to my collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to my collection. Please recommend. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 23 Snape's Thoughts. What Ino didn't know was that, not long after he left, the Slytherin common room fell into profound silence. The prefect from earlier had returned, standing obediently to the side, completely devoid of his previous demeanor. Behind the prefect stood a middle-aged wizard with greasy hair. Professor. Professor Snape. Headmaster. The little snakes, who had been chatting away just moments before, now stood up and greeted him as if they had seen their natural enemy. Snape, however, ignored the greetings, only nodding slightly when passing one or two students. Snape walked over to Malfoy with an expressionless face, then silently looked him up and down. Professor. Malfoy stood up with a certain stiffness, a stark contrast to his previous impassioned demeanor. You're enjoying this honor. Snape glanced around. And you? Do you find it rewarding to gather together just to gossip? Sorry, Professor. I'll be leaving now. I have a paper. With Snape's scolding, the common room dwindled, emptying out in an instant. Even those who were actually working on their papers immediately took their belongings and returned to their dormitories. Malfoy was the only one on pins and needles. It wasn't that he didn't want to leave, but as the only one named by the professor, others could have just walked away, but not him. A few minutes later, only 3 people remained in the vast Slytherin common room. Lucius wrote to me, asking me to look after his outstanding son. Snape looked at the bewildered Malfoy, reluctant to say anything. But because of a favor he had once owed Lucius, he couldn't ignore it. You can do whatever you want from now on, but don't let me hear you gossiping behind my back again. Professor, I understand. Malfoy nodded quickly, and with Snape's tacit approval, he fled back to his dormitories. Bang! As Malfoy vanished completely behind the door, only Snape and the Slytherin prefect remained. Mund, be quiet for a while. As for your old ways, you can do it, but be careful about the means and methods. Prefect Mund Acarus, born into the Acarus family of the Sacred 28, easily understood Snape's meaning. Be quiet meant that Slytherin couldn't behave like it had in the past few years. Be careful about the means and methods was just short of telling them to stop their old ways. Although he felt a little unhappy, he had to face the situation. I know what to do, Mr. Snape. As Prefect Mund's back gradually faded into the distance, a long pause passed. Snape raised his arm, examined it carefully for a moment, and then gently lowered it. Today's sorting ceremony reminded him of someone he had admired during his school days. During dinner, Snape once again saw those amber eyes. Unlike the purity and clarity others saw, he saw only a falsehood. Like the deep blue sea, countless unknowns and secrets lurked beneath its surface. Snape had once had the good fortune to meet him during his time at Hogwarts. The same dark hair, the same gentle demeanor, even the same ever-soft smile. When the two images merged in his mind, Snape felt an inexplicable shudder within him. And that was precisely why he had come to the common room after the banquet tonight. As the head of Slytherin, Snape also had to consider the safety of his students. Everything about Hogwarts this year struck him as uncanny, from the new students to the professors and even the headmaster. Therefore, he had to be proactive and nip any potential risks in the bud, including the traditional tricks of the house prefects. Even missing out on the House Cup for 6 consecutive years was no big deal. Thursday, September 2nd, 1991. Ino reluctantly opened his eyes at the sound of a call in the early morning. Thank you, Draco. I'm awake. That's good. Class still has half an hour left, so you can still make it in time for breakfast. I've got your schedule for you, it's on the table. With that, Malfoy dashed out. Bang! As the door slammed shut, Ino couldn't help but smile bitterly. Malfoy's impatience made it clear he'd been to the Great Hall early, pretending to wait for a chance encounter with his Harry. What a partiality. But I need to find an alarm clock. Ino glanced at his bedside watch. It was exactly 8:30. Just as Malfoy had said, class still had another half hour. But he knew that half an hour would not only involve washing and dressing, but also fighting off those moving stairs. If he really calculated it, there wouldn't be any time for breakfast. 10 minutes later, after washing up and changing into fresh robes, Ino picked up the schedule Malfoy had left on the table. Charms, not transfiguration. While it wasn't what he'd expected, it was perfectly normal. In movies and TV shows, the first period is Transfiguration, taught by Slytherin and Gryffindor together, but this isn't a 1-hour movie. The real world has many variables. I can't be late, no matter what. The moment he saw the schedule, Ino made a decision. He'd rather skip breakfast than be late for his first charms class. Charms was his most important subject, so Professor Flitwick's first impression was crucial. It directly depended on whether he could get special attention later. It was already difficult for a Slytherin to get special attention from the head of House of Ravenclaw, and to be late on his first day. With that thought in mind, Ino opened his suitcase, pulled out a block of cheese, and hurried out as well. 8:50 a.m. Huh? Finally made it. Good thing Professor Flitwick isn't here, Ino muttered quietly. After a bit of a climb up the stairs, he finally reached the charms classroom. Entering, he noticed quite a few people were already there, especially those with blue-streaked hawks on their collars. Almost everyone was already seated. Mr. Swinburne, take a seat in the first row. Just as Ino was about to find a seat of his choice, a voice rang out from behind the podium. I heard you successfully cast a fire spell outside the castle last night, and it hovered quietly on the tip of your wand, providing light for everyone. Professor Flitwick, less than 2 feet tall, ascended the specially designed small staircase, gradually ascending to the podium. Thank you for the compliment, Professor Flitwick, Ino said with a smile. Your love for magic has kept me practicing for a long time during the summer vacation. While I always encourage talented students to learn on their own, I want to say, don't just blindly practice on your own, Professor Flitwick said approvingly. He then looked at the students in the classroom and warned them in a serious tone, I hope you will remember this too. Don't practice magic blindly alone. I encourage you to learn on your own, but I hope even more so that you will practice magic under my guidance. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Chapter 24, The Quick Success Charms Class. Ino had always admired Professor Flitwick, not just for his past as a champion of the magical duel tournament. More importantly, he admired how, despite being half-elf, he managed to remain head of Ravenclaw even during the era of Voldemort's pure-blood ideology. Later, he bravely participated in the final battle, and even after the deaths of Dumbledore, Snape, and others, he continued to teach at Hogwarts. This wasn't simply due to strength or intelligence, it was more like wisdom, the true wisdom of Ravenclaw. Looking at the little old man at the podium, Ino's mind flashed with another image. The similarly short third suitcase, a man of both strength and intelligence, had lived a peaceful life despite experiencing many ups and downs. As the bell rang, the class bell rang. Professor Flitwick also demonstrated his masterful teaching skills. First, with a silent levitation spell, he caused a textbook to automatically leap from a drawer, then flutter across to the podium like a dancer. He then used a humorous and playful approach to explain the principles of spellcasting and the proper wand-holding technique to the young wizards. Although they learned absolutely no magic, no one complained. After all, who but a fool would dislike a lively, engaging, and relaxing class? Besides, did Professor Flitwick assign homework? Time flew by. The charms class ended with the young wizard's eager eyes. Ino deliberately delayed gathering his books and notes, observing Professor Flitwick from the corner of his eye. However, reality was harsh. His ideal of being stopped by Professor Flitwick for a long chat in private lessons never materialized. Sure enough, I'm a bit full of myself, Ino said in the corridor, once again amused at his own naivete. After reading too many stories, one tends to believe that life is full of miracles, that one will always be treated differently. At the corner of the corridor, Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe stood chatting. Their eyes met, and Malfoy took the initiative to greet them. Hey. Ino. I thought you'd be kept by Professor Flitwick. I didn't expect it would be so soon. Draco, was I really that obvious? Ino said, a little weary. Haha, you mean just now. Malfoy chuckled smugly. Only those idiots in Gryffindor wouldn't notice. As for Scarhead, that's Harry Potter. If he'd gone into Gryffindor, he'd have been assimilated and become stupid. Didn't you know I was in the Great Hall this morning? Seeing Malfoy about to ramble on, Ino quickly interrupted. Listen, Draco. We have a flying lesson the day after tomorrow. You can show off your skills and let Potter see for himself. Yes. Malfoy's eyes lit up. You're right. Scarhead grew up in the Muggle world, so he certainly wouldn't be able to ride a broom. I'll write a letter now and ask my father to send a broom. Those old Hogwarts antiques don't reflect my flying skills at all. Without waiting for Ino's reply, Malfoy led Goyle and Crabbe downstairs, looking anxious. Watching the wily figure wave away without a trace of Cloud, Ino shook his head in amusement, reflecting on himself. He now knew where his problem lay, his overzealous pursuit of quick success. Think about it, if even Malfoy could see through his intentions, how could the renowned head of Ravenclaw, renowned for his wisdom, not know? He must have already left a utilitarian impression on him. What a mistake. Ino rubbed his brow in annoyance, but since things had come to this, he couldn't blame anyone else. He then pulled his watch from his pocket. It was 10:30 a.m., more than an hour before lunch was served in the Great Hall. Considering the long commute, Ino didn't even bother returning to his dorm to put his books away, instead heading straight for the library. As mentioned earlier, his greatest interest in Hogwarts lay not only in the sorting hat but also in the library and the coming and going room of requirement. Meanwhile, in the castle's basement, after finishing his morning potions class, Snape didn't return to his office as usual, but sat alone in the empty classroom, lost in thought. The culprit was the annual timetable on the desk, which prominently listed the first afternoon potions class for first-year Slytherins and Gryffindors. Having already met Harry, Snape was prepared to be gazed upon by those emerald green eyes once again. Yet, the sight of the timetable still left him feeling dazed, even a sense of time and space disorientation. A Slytherin who looked like that one, a green-eyed Gryffindor, and himself. Snape glanced at the class schedule on his desk again. For a moment, he truly wanted to confront Dumbledore about everything, including his own suspicions and Ino Swinburne's occlumency. But he could never fully trust Dumbledore. After all, there were so many suspicious points about that night in Godric's Hollow. Everything was so coincidental, even a little too coincidental, including Sirius's leak. Wait a little longer, at least until the end of one class, Snape muttered softly in the empty potions classroom. He looked like a motionless puppet, issuing a final command before resetting itself. The Hogwarts Library. It housed the largest and most comprehensive collection of magical books in Britain, and indeed in Europe. From commonplace textbooks to profound and advanced magic, even the dark arts, it contained everything. Entering the library for the first time, Ino was astounded by the vast collection. Compared to London's Foyle's bookshop, the Hogwarts Library pales in comparison, neither in terms of collection size nor overall scale. Over 5 meters high, walnut bookshelves, row upon row, stretched so tightly together that the end seemed almost endless. Perhaps because it was the first day of school, the library was sparsely populated. Occasionally, one or two young wizards would scramble in a corner, catching up on summer homework. Stopping and starting along the way, Ino found the vast library, now eerily quiet, like a lonely city. It feels so empty, huh? After wandering aimlessly for a while, Ino unknowingly arrived at a cordoned-off corridor. Seeing the prominent sign, he couldn't help but peer inside. After all, the restricted section at Hogwarts had fostered countless top dark wizards. It was no exaggeration to call it a training ground for the elite. Not to mention the past, in just the past half-century, Voldemort, with his book Advanced Dark Arts Unveiled, has become the nightmare of every wizard in the British Isles. The restricted section has played a significant role in Tom's success. Meanwhile, a questioning voice came from behind Ino. "Son, what book are you looking for? A new book launch marks a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass." Chapter 25 Library. Madame Pants always hated the start of school, because it meant her cherished books would once again be mercilessly poured over by unsophisticated young wizards. Likewise, the quiet and solemn library would become bustling with noise. And today, just as school started, she saw another furtive young wizard slipping into the library silently and pretending to wander around the bookshelves. She had seen this kind of student many times. Sure enough, he stopped at the entrance to the restricted section. "What a worry. I don't know what's so curious about here," Madame Pants complained inwardly, but she didn't hesitate to act. She quickly stopped the wizard before he reached the cordon. "Child, what book are you looking for? The restricted section is just ahead. It's not open to students." Honestly, Madam Pants was about to scold him, but the moment he turned around, a pair of crystal-clear eyes made her change her tone. "Hello, Professor." Ino bowed slightly, knowing he wasn't a professor, but he still addressed him politely. "As you can see, I'm lost. But I wasn't planning on going to the restricted section. I just wanted to find some books on spells in the library, since my last class was Professor Flitwick's." As she spoke, Ino calmly surveyed the witch before her, Irma Pants, the Hogwarts librarian. Just as described in the books, she was a gaunt, 50-year-old woman. "I'm not a professor. Just call me Madam Pants," Madam Pants said with a smile. Unlike her usual boisterous little wizards, this well-behaved and polite boy seemed to have unleashed a hidden maternal light in her, and her tone was surprisingly kind. "Yes, Madam Pants." Ino nodded gently. "Could you tell me where all the books on spells are kept?" "Merlin. This place is truly vast." "Of course. The sheer volume of books here is unimaginable," Madam Pants said with uncanny pride. After a few seconds of thought, she continued, "There are so many books on spells, but I recommend you start with the most basic. Come with me, child." A few minutes later, Ino followed Madam Pants to another area. "Everything here is about spells, but I sincerely advise you not to read blindly. Perhaps in a few years you can try the back shelves, but not now." Just as Madam Pants was about to leave, something suddenly occurred to her, and she turned and said, "Oh, and although you're a polite child, I still have to say this: if you tear, fold, throw, or otherwise damage a book, I will permanently expel you. Hogwarts gives me that right. Don't worry about that. I will cherish every book like a friend," Ino promised without a second thought. He knew Madam Pants's character well. While he didn't understand why she was so gracious today, if he wanted to stay in the library permanently, it would be wise to cultivate good relations with the actual authority there. Madam Pants nodded in approval after hearing the promise. "I'm sorry to scare you. I need to explain the rules to every student who comes to the library for the first time. That's my job." Hearing this, Ino said nonchalantly, "Of course, a responsible administrator is a blessing not only for the library and its books, but also for us borrowers." This dose of commercial flattery immediately made Madam Pants smile. "If only everyone were as sensible as you." As Madam Pants left, Ino's thoughts turned to the books before him. Unlike most people, he had no interest in the dark arts of the restricted section. Even a powerful curse like the Unforgivable Curse, used by a young wizard, would at most cause Mad Eye Moody to bleed from the nose. But then again, perhaps even a bunch of Death Eaters tied together still couldn't withstand a Vulcan blast unleashed by Dumbledore. This shows that it's not the spells that are powerful, but the people who cast them. Meanwhile, amidst a dazzling array of book titles, Ino conventionally chose the second-year edition of the Standard Book of Spells. Safety was paramount. He carefully picked up the book and headed to the adjacent reading area. Upon opening it, he discovered that compared to the elementary Standard Book of Spells, the second-year textbook not only delved deeper into the previous spells, but also added several practical new spells, such as the Swelling Charm, the Freezing Charm, the Universal Breaking Charm, the Crunching Charm. The Hogwarts Potions Classroom. Located in the castle's basement, it was the closest classroom to the Slytherin Common Room. After returning from the library, Ino, carrying his textbook, headed to class with Malfoy and the others. The little snakes always took their head of house's classes very seriously. Not only did they arrive early to wait, but even pre-class chatter was absent, leaving the classroom eerily silent. However, this silence was short-lived, as more Gryffindors entered the classroom, and the clamor of conversation gradually rose. "If you ask me, there's no need to come so early. Look at the time, Harry. We're a full 20 minutes early. Ron, stop talking and get in first. Did you forget about Transfiguration this morning? And compared to Professor McGonagall, this Professor Snape looks a lot tougher." The voices arrived before the people arrived. In the relatively quiet basement, the chatter outside the corridor always carried far. In the classroom, Malfoy, who had been nearly dozing off, instantly perked up at the sound of Harry's name. His eyes brightened, eager to try, as if ready to cause trouble at any moment. Time slipped by. Ino sat quietly in the back row, watching with interest the young wizards who entered the classroom one after another. Harry, Ron, Seamus the explosive genius, Neville the sword master, Hermione the know-it-all, and so on. Interestingly, the know-it-all seemed to be a little upset. As she passed him just now, She not only turned her head to the side but also raised her chin proudly. She looked like a proud swan. It's inexplicable. Day after day, it's like someone owes you money. Ino was speechless. He didn't believe he'd ever offended Hermione, especially after the sorting, when he hadn't spoken a word to her. At 2 p.m. sharp, there was a bang at the door, and Potions Professor Snape strode into the classroom. Tall and thin, he wore a long, flowing, jet-black robe, his sleeves fluttering as he walked. The candles on the classroom walls lit one by one as he walked. When he reached the podium and turned around, all the candlesticks blazed brightly, as if by agreement. Snape stood calmly at the podium, observing everyone with a cold gaze. No young wizard dared to meet his gaze. Very good. It seems you all understand the importance of punctuality. A new book release, a new journey. Thank you all for your support. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. Please add this to your collection. Please recommend it. Please give me a monthly pass. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.